Please take your seats. We are starting our works of this afternoon. Good afternoon, dear delegates. This afternoon, we will finalize our consideration of the last item on our agenda, item 7, biodiversity and climate change. After that, we will consider our first CRP documents, CRP1 on plant conservation, and CRP2 on review of findings from the methodological assessment report on the diverse values and valuation of nature of the IPBES and the implications for the work undertaken under the convention. At the very end of our session yesterday, we began our considerations on item 7 on biodiversity and climate change. The Secretariat introduced the documents for our consideration, but we ran out of time. So I was unable to open the floor for interventions. We will take up this item now following brief reports from the co-chairs of the contact groups that had been taking place since yesterday's session on items 3A, 3B, and 5. After our session yesterday, the first contact group on item 3A met from 7:30 to 11:30 p.m. It was co-chaired by Mr. Jan Plesnik from Czechia and Mr. Adams Toussaint from St. Lucia. I would like now to invite Mr. Plesnik of Czechia to provide us with a brief report on the progress. Jan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. The contact group on the item 3A, Monitoring Framework for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, met for the first time last night from 7:30 to 11 p.m. It was co-chaired by myself and my colleague, Adam Toussaint of St. Lucia. One of the co-chairs of the ACTEC, Mr. James Williams, served as resource person for the contact group, and I thank him for the valuable advice he provided to the contact group deliberations. The contact group deliberation included substantive requests for the ACTEC members, and Mr. Williams informed the group that the ACTEC would be able to accommodate a limited number of ad hoc additional requests for work coming from this meeting, considering that the focus of ACTEC should shift to methodology of headline indicators. Special thanks go also to the highly professional Secretariat staff assisting the group. During the contact group, 25 parties and 3 observers took the floor. However, I am sorry to report, Chair, that the group did not make much progress on the non-paper. We did manage to cover all the suggested recommendations with only one paragraph left with brackets, but the parties with those divergent views have proposed a suggested way forward, so at this time the suggested recommendation contain clean text. The goal B indicator and related question B1, B2, and B3 were also considered. We heard diverging views and detailed interventions on the appropriate focus of the questions to enable efficient monitoring that offers insight into the progress on goal B. The group did not find the time to discuss the target indicators, and therefore we do see the need for this contact group to meet again. I and my co-chair expect that if we do not make very significant progress in the next meeting of the contact group, that a different way forward will need to be proposed for the monitoring framework presented in this non-paper. Chair, allow me some words without official statement. I would like really remind us that binary indicators are subset, very important, but still a subset of the indicators to be used to measure the progress in implementing GBF. And please, let's concentrate on the scientific, technical, and technological issue, because it seems to me that it is not very appropriate if this distinguished scientific, technical, and technological body deals with the question whether it is better to say to welcome or to take a note. And I would like also appear for today go through all the document, the whole annex, and simply say, yes, green light, or red light and why, or probably most often the amber. And lifetime, I apologize for saying the platitude, life is sometimes not so easy, but on the other hand, therefore we like it. And please remind us that this set of indicators will be used by us, that means by parties, observers, and other stakeholders to report on the implementation of GBF. And at the very end, I would like to say that I like mathematics, and I made a projection based on the development yesterday, and it looks like that if we will be not able to really proceed much more quicker, but at a very effective way, then probably I will have to ask for a new visa for Kenya. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jan and Adams, for your report and the hard work. I fully agree with your views, also as former SBSTTA chair, that we need to honor our group in terms that we should focus our deliberations on scientific and technical matters. I hope that once we are already in the part of the annex that goes to the binary indicators, we can pass in a practical way and to analyze the essence and the main questions in connection with the different targets to see if this is useful or not for parties to report. Let's be pragmatic, let's be clear on the technical elements and work in order to have clean this. Please be aware that there is no need to have a binary indicator for all targets. We don't also need to have a headline indicator for all targets. Binary indicators are a help when we don't have methodologies ready, or because many still in development. So it's not mandatory. We need to have indicators for each target, either binary or headline or complementary or components. So let's be practical. We have to finish our work. We need to deliver at least this part. You know, the ATE has a lot of things to do in the intersessional period yet. So at least we should make progress in this part, and this is why SBSTTA is taking a look to this annex with the different binary indicators. So the contact group on item 3A will meet again this evening. A new version of the non-paper is available on the website, building on the result of last night's discussions. It will take place in this room at 7:30. I wish you all the best, and please help us, everybody, to move forward in a very responsible manner to move with good technical and scientific basis to help our parties to use these indicators to report progress of our framework. Okay, this morning, also the contact group on item 3B, co-chaired by Mr. Gott Boyd Hansen of Norway and Mr. Bilal Quishtad from Jordan, met from 10 a.m. to consider the non-paper. I would like now to invite Mr. Voigt Hansen to provide us with a brief report on the progress. I'm sorry that you haven't eaten yet. Your food is waiting for you, I know.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's always a time for food, I guess. Yes, thank you. So the contact group met from 10 to 2:30. We experienced quite a lot of technical problems with the mics, which delayed us a bit from the beginning, and also that continued the problem almost throughout, actually. So we were also dealing with handheld microphones at the time. So it was very dynamic, I would say, but indeed challenging as well. But we had a good group of parties and observers working together. The mood was good. We started on the COP recommendation and worked on that until Para 8, I believe, and then we went to the annex, which establishes the terms of reference of the ad hoc scientific advisory group for the preparation of the global report on collective progress. And there we experience that there is convergence on the establishment of an advisory group, and also on its composition, and also partly on its functions. So I think that's good. There is still a divergence on the sources that are to feed into the global report. The issue being that some parties would like to limit the sources to intergovernmental sources only, while other parties would like to keep it more open and draw on all relevant scientific sources. So I think that's sort of the main divergent area, but as a whole, the group worked well together. Although we had time constraints, we made good progress and went through the whole document, which will now be edited by the Secretariat. So we stand at your disposal, Chair, for further work. If you wish so, there might be merit in that. Otherwise, CRP. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both Mr. Hansen and Bilal, and the entire contact group for your hard work. The contact group will have a second session tomorrow morning. The place will be announced, and I hope that after you pass already to the whole document and the understanding that you mentioned, you can also have important progress in cleaning the document as much as possible in order to have a good CRP for the plenary. So I wish you all the best for tomorrow morning, and thank you for your support, co-chairs and all participants. Dear colleagues, also this morning, the contact group on item 5, co-chaired by Ms. Senka Barutanovic from Bosnia and Herzegovina and Mr. Jean-Bruno Mikisa of Gabon, met from 10:30 a.m. The group was established when we met yesterday afternoon. Now I would like to invite Ms. Barutanovic to provide us with a brief report on the progress. Senka, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The contact group on invasive alien species met today from 10:30 to 2:15 p.m. It was chaired, as you said, by distinguished delegates from Gabon, Jean-Bruno Mikisa, and myself. It was well attended by parties and observers who finalized their deliberation on the content of annexes created through the work of AHTEG for invasive species in 2019, but also through subsequent processes, including peer review and online forum. The good spirit of compromise prevailed during the session. I wish to thank all delegates for their patience and support, but mainly for keeping the approach simple as it was intention. Thanks to this chair, I'm happy to report that after very rich discussion, we have now clean text on all 6 annexes. Once again, I thank all delegates and Secretariat for their great support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for the good news. You were very scared at the beginning, so I'm happy to see that you have clean text in the 6 annexes, so this can be served to the CRP document to continue our deliberations. Thank you very much, and to all participants in this contact group. So we will see a complete document for CRP in deliberations in the next days. Now we will pick up where we left off yesterday at 6 p.m. with our consideration of item 7 on biodiversity and climate change. Before I open the floor for interventions, I would like to remind parties and observers to please upload your statements prior to taking the floor, to facilitate interpretation and to ensure your points are understood by everyone. Now I open the floor for interventions on item 7. I will ask delegates to focus their intervention on the draft recommendations. Please try to avoid to give context. Don't waste 2 minutes in giving context. Go straight to the changes or suggestions you want on the recommendation, please. So I will start giving the floor to Brazil, followed by Mexico and Germany.
Thank you, Chair. We all fully understand the contribution that ecosystem conservation and restoration can make to climate change adaptation and mitigation. The loss of biodiversity is both one of the causes and one of the effects of climate change. However, it's crucial that the specific weight of these factors is recognized in an appropriate and balanced way in the broader context of climate change. The IPCC's 6th assessment report is crystal clear in confirming that the largest share in growth in gross greenhouse gas emissions occurs in CO2 from fossil fuels combustion and industrial processes, in particular for historical contributions. That is by far the first and foremost cause of climate change, and it is in this context that item 7 needs to be addressed. If we discuss the link between climate change and biodiversity without taking this wider context into account, we risk diluting the imperative of rapid, deep, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, especially emissions derived from fossil fuels. It is for this very reason that Resolution UNEA 5/5, paragraph 2, explicitly says, and I quote, that while nature-based solutions—
Can you speak slower, please, for interpreters?
I sent the statement to the interpreters.
Yes, but still.
May contribute significantly to climate action, they do not replace the need for rapid, deep, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. For this reason, we note with deep concern some mentions in the recommendations contained in document 25/12, for example, in paragraph 3, that seem to shift the focus and the burden of reducing emissions mainly to developing countries. This includes the potential misuse of the concept of nature-based solutions. The carbon sequestering provided by nature cannot and will not fully compensate the emissions from fossil fuels, combustion, and industrial processes. In this regard, we draw attention to the contribution of Working Group 2 to the IPCC 6th Assessment Report that says, and I quote, that the term nature-based solutions is widely but not universally used in the scientific literature. It is a subject of ongoing debate with concerns that it may lead to the misunderstanding that NBS on its own can provide a global solution to climate change. Concerning paragraph 7, we remember that the outcome of the consultations on NBS will not be a negotiated task, but a co-chair summary. Therefore, we think it's not adequate to request the Secretariat to review and to provide guidance on the application of a document that was not negotiated and is not even ready yet. And finally, we fully support the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in this process, as mentioned in paragraph 4 and 8. As stated in the IPCC 6th Assessment Report, and I quote, cooperation collaboration and inclusive decision-making with indigenous peoples and local communities, as well as recognition of inherent rights of indigenous peoples, is integral to successful adaptation and mitigation across forests and other ecosystems. We will provide these comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I'll give the floor to Mexico, followed by Germany and Switzerland.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. Mexico recognizes the work carried out by the Secretariat of the Convention for the integration of information from parties and other stakeholders. In addition, Mexico believes that at present there are mechanisms and tools available and already approved which can provide solutions to challenges faced in terms of biodiversity and the threat it presents to climate change. An example of this, which Mexico has always promoted, is an ecosystem-based approach, which maintains the ecological integrity of territories, but also recognizes social rights, economic rights, and cultural rights related to these ecosystems. Mexico recognizes the interrelated nature of the loss of biodiversity, climate change, and land degradation, and urges people to find tools in line with Paris Agreement in order to implement the Framework Convention and take a precautionary principle to establish measures which do not threaten biodiversity. We call for the implementation of adaptation measures to be already nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based approaches. These need to be designed considering that local contexts are vital and need to be taken into account. We also need the participation of indigenous peoples and local communities. Thank you very much, Chair.
Gracias, Mexico. Now I'll give the floor to Germany, followed by Switzerland and European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Germany highly appreciates the work undertaken by the Secretariat and believes this is an excellent basis for our negotiations here in Nairobi. Germany is highly committed to engage in the discussions during the next days in a constructive manner. We are here to listen, to find common ground and make progress. We have no time to waste. This decade is decisive to overcome the biodiversity and climate crisis, together, not in isolation, to deliver both on the Global Biodiversity Framework and the Paris Agreement. This exchange comes timely 6 weeks ahead of UNFCCC COP28. For Germany, the following points are central in the upcoming discussions on item 7. First, we need a better alignment between policies, strategies, and plans for enhanced biodiversity and climate action. This includes the work under the Rio Conventions, but also more integrated approaches at national level by enhancing synergies among NBSUBs, NDCs, and NUBs, their revision and implementation. Second, we strongly support the broad application of the voluntary guidelines for the design and effective implementation of ecosystem-based approaches to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, which UNFCCC and the parties should be invited to follow. Its principles, safeguards, and tools for planning and implementing EBA and ECODRR should also apply to ecosystem-based approaches to mitigation. Third, we regard those ecosystem-based approaches as part of the wide and inclusive umbrella term of nature-based solutions. Since we would like to realize integrated action, Germany is a strong supporter and promoter of the ENACT initiative, joining Egypt on this, and was always a strong advocate for environmental and social safeguards for nature-based solutions to ensure benefits for biodiversity and people and avoid misuse and greenwashing. Germany therefore supports the use of the IUCN Global Nature-Based Solution Standard and the Friends of Ecosystem-Based Adaptation EBA criteria, which are compatible. However, we understand that though some parties see the relation between nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches differently. For that reason, we should refrain from any further discussions about terms and focus on the implementation of the GBF and aligned action for nature and climate. We will hand in our detailed text proposal in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Germany. I'll give the floor to Switzerland, followed by EU and United Arab Emirates.
Gracias, Señor Presidente. Switzerland considers the conclusion and the recommendations for consideration at COP16 contained in document 2512 to accurately reflect the views submitted by parties and other stakeholders on this topic. We strongly support their adoption at COP, as a formal COP decision will increase its relevance and it will help to strengthen synergies between the Rio Conventions and mainstream actions undertaken by parties and non-state actors. It will also offer new funding opportunities in relation to and in cooperation with UNFCCC and climate action linked to the climate process. Nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches will be instrumental to progress on targets 8 and 11. We would welcome the review of the outcomes of the intergovernmental consultations on nature-based solutions by UNEP, mentioned in paragraph 7, to provide further guidance on their application. Finally, Switzerland did participate in the Wilm European Expert Meeting and aligned itself with the recommendation of this expert group. In a few points, we added some text in order to be more concise, and we will hand in this text to the Secretariat in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. I'll give the floor to EU, followed by UAE and China.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Science is clear. Climate change and biodiversity loss are interdependent and can only be addressed successfully in an integrated manner. An attempt to address these emergencies in isolation will lead to failure on both. Climate change is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss, and at the same time, biodiversity conservation, restoration, and its sustainable use have been proved an effective contribution to addressing climate change. In fact, nature, terrestrial and marine ecosystems together have been absorbing roughly half of the anthropogenic CO2 emissions. Thus, ecosystems have buffered climate change, and without this crucial ecosystem service, climate change would be even faster. Hence, the European Union recognizes the importance of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches for climate mitigation and adaptation and for increasing resilience to climate change impacts, and we strongly support that nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches are embedded into the revised national biodiversity strategies and action plans and also into their reporting and planning processes, including nationally determined contributions, long-term strategies and national adaptation plans. Having said this, as is also stated in the UNEA Resolution 5.5, nature-based solutions are not a panacea. We need to accelerate the implementation of technological and nature-based and societal solutions to address the planetary emergency we are facing. The European Union supports the development of a supplement on ecosystem-based mitigation to the voluntary guidelines adopted in decision CBD-COP 14/5. Considering that the findings of the IPCC assessment report introduced under Agenda Item 4D are highly relevant in the context of biodiversity and climate, we would like to address these two agenda items jointly under Agenda Item 7. We think that it is important that considerations on IPCC are included in the draft recommendation for COP16. We find that the text as proposed by the CBD Secretariat is a good basis to start our work. However, we are of the view that it needs to be significantly strengthened. Our suggestions are inspired by the report of the experts meeting on the island of Wilm, which is available on the website of this meeting. We will submit them in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to United Arab Emirates and followed by China and New Zealand.
شكرا سيدي الرئيس.
Thank you so much, sir. The UAE consider that it is extremely important that these documents be tackled in keeping with ecosystems and climate change, as well as nature-based solutions. And if we do this, then we will be successful in meeting our challenges. The United Arab Emirates are working to set up a national strategy for biodiversity and are working to incorporate nature-based solutions into it. These methodologies will also be part and parcel of the national strategy for biodiversity and the protection of the environment. To bolster international cooperation in this field, we have launched an initiative side by side with Indonesia, whose objective is to expand the area of protected zones and the sequestration of carbon at a global level. This initiative, Innovation in Agriculture, is a further international cooperation initiative with the United States, which is aimed at meeting the challenges of intelligent, innovative investment, aimed at enhancing food security for all of the inhabitants of our planet, and to involve farmers, strengthen their capacities in the face of climate change. The UAE are organizing the Climate Change COP, and we are going to spare no effort to ensure that international commitments are met. And we will work to strengthen international cooperation with all parties to protect and preserve biodiversity and to improve the resilience of our planet. Thank you so much.
Apologize, but United Kingdom can't use their mic, and they asked if I can mention this for them, if it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't get it. You're finished, right?
Yeah, I'm done. But
Okay.
United Kingdom can't use their mic. They're asking for the floor, and they requested if I can mention this for them.
Just press. It's okay now. Just press. Yeah. It's okay.
Thank you.
It's okay.
Thank you.
It's okay. You can just switch. I see UK now is on the queue, so when we reach the moment, they'll have the floor. Now, sorry, I need to go back to my list. I'll give the floor now to China, followed by New Zealand and Venezuela.
Thank you, Chair. China appreciates the draft recommendations prepared by the Secretariat, which will facilitate further consultation and discussion. We also noted the divergent views during last week's MBS consultation. We'd like to propose the following. Firstly, we know that many expressions in the draft reflect a tendency to focus on addressing the climate change crisis. When referring to past decisions, welcoming the findings of the IPCC reports and discussing the scale of implementation and cost effectiveness, the draft emphasizes on the key role of biodiversity and key ecosystems in climate mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction, which is not entirely in line with the logic of the framework, which, as stated in Goal 8 of the framework, focuses on minimizing the impacts of climate change and climate action on biodiversity and ecosystems and increasing its resilience. Secondly, we reiterate that the program on finance should reflect a clear distinction between public and private sectors. We should prioritize the flow of funds from developed to developing countries in accordance with Article 20 of the Convention, avoid double counting of biodiversity and climate change funds, and ensure the transparency of funds. The decision should also discuss innovative funding options to complement existing sources. Thirdly, we suggest that the decision's wording could be more positive to provide better guidance. Statements such as note that the achievement of the goals and mission of the KMGBF is not possible without urgent and effective action on climate change could be changed to notes that urgent and effective action on climate action is needed to achieve the goals and missions of the framework. Written mission will be delivered. And we have noted the mistakes in the Chinese version of the document, which will be provided in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, China, and dear colleagues. I have more than 40 requests for the floor. And I invite you, I know you have your statements already prepared in advance, but you are giving a lot of context. We know climate change is very important, we need to work. We want to see what are your suggestions on the recommendations. Please try to go straight to the suggestions in order to have on time, because also we have 2 other documents to work in this session. I beg you for go straight to that part. I appreciate your cooperation. Now I'll give the floor to New Zealand, followed by Venezuela and Canada.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand considers the Kunming-Montreal GBF gives us a clear mandate to pursue synergies and cooperation between the Rio Conventions and to promote the inclusion of biodiversity considerations in climate responses. New Zealand therefore supports the draft recommendations and decision as a useful starting point for our discussions, and would like to propose the following amendments to the draft COP decision. In the decision, we support the critical points made, particularly in paragraphs 1 to 3, that reducing the loss of natural ecosystems must be amongst our highest priorities to address both biodiversity loss and the climate change global crises. In paragraph 6, New Zealand suggests we include a reference to the KMGBF after Article 20 and insert the word collective, so it would refer to collectively scaling up investments. In paragraph 7, we support the reference to the UNEA Resolution 5.5, which is an important guide to our implementation of nature-based solutions under the Convention. We also support taking note of the outcomes of the intergovernmental consultations on nature-based solutions undertaken last week. However, we think we need to edit the wording of this paragraph to clarify that it is the multilateral agreed UNEA resolution which is our core reference document, not the outcome of the intergovernmental consultations, which will be an information document. The UNEA resolution also includes important safeguards for climate action, consistent with the elements of Target 8, which, for example, will help to ensure that the implementation of nature-based solutions will ensure respect for the contribution and rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities. Turning to the rest of the decision, New Zealand considers policy alignment between our climate change and biodiversity responses is essential to promote coherence, complementarity, and synergy in solving both crises. If we are to accelerate synergistic action, however, this is going to need the best available scientific knowledge, including to increase our understanding of the functional role of biodiversity in underpinning the integrity of ecosystems and ecosystem services, and how this can contribute to addressing both climate change and biodiversity loss. So after paragraph 8, we would suggest inserting 2 additional paragraphs saying, recognizing the importance of the best available science for effective and integrated biodiversity and climate action and policy, encourages IPBES and IPCC to continue to collaborate in the provision of relevant information to parties on the scientific, technical, and socioeconomic aspects of integrated approaches to biodiversity and climate change. We would also see potential in the value of the CBD supporting the invitation that has been made for a joint IPBES-IPCC report or assessment on biodiversity and climate change. We will submit these comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. Now Venezuela, followed by Canada and Japan.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. Venezuela reiterates that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, along with its related legal instruments, is the main international climate regime and intergovernmental forum to negotiate the global response to climate change. In this regard, Venezuela recognizes that the effects of climate change affect biodiversity at all levels and create uncertainty with regards to how to design the best strategies for adaptation and mitigation. Therefore, it's important to analyze in detail the opportunities, limits, and restrictions, as well as additional benefits which could be provided for these measures. In addition, in relation to paragraph 4b, we need to ensure that these solutions and/or approaches do not lead to poor adaptation due to the harmful effects of climate change on nature, reiterating the principle of precaution, and decisions 9/16 and 10/33, paragraph 8. Indeed, it's important to develop measures directed at protecting biodiversity, which are consistent with the need to also tackle the climate emergency and vice versa. It's essential that these measures are developed taking into account the perspective of environmental justice, and which also take into account common but differentiated responsibilities on a historical basis, both and also now for the global north. In Venezuela, the Rio Principles are more relevant than ever. We recognize the importance of the active participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, and express our respect for their ancestral knowledge. With regard to paragraph 6, Venezuela is in favor of the provision of implementation means, including financing, technology transfer, and capacity building for developing countries from developed countries. This is essential to take conservation, restoration measures, and to manage ecosystems in a sustainable manner. In addition, we ask for the deletion of paragraph 7 of the draft declaration, since the intergovernmental consultations on nature-based solutions did not produce concrete results or outcomes, which need to be considered at this time. Thank you.
Gracias, Venezuela.
Thank you, Venezuela.
Go to Canada, followed by Japan and Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Chair. The official document provides a good basis for addressing biodiversity loss and climate change in an integrated manner. Firstly, Canada would like to make a new proposal in the draft COP decision to explore opportunities for cooperation with relevant organizations to advance recognition of the role of the ocean in regulating the climate. This is in line with Decision 1524 on marine and coastal biodiversity and outcomes of the 2023-2024 UN Ocean Climate Dialogue. To support this proposal, Canada would also like to add 2 preambular paragraphs to recognize the need for enhanced cooperation and synergies with global and regional organizations with respect to biodiversity and climate change. Canada supports scaling up investments for biodiversity and will propose minor changes to paragraph 6 to put the emphasis on investments for biodiversity that jointly address climate change mitigation and adaptation and halting and reversing biodiversity loss. Canada supports integrating nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches into NBSAPs and relevant national targets, and ensuring synergies with other national planning processes, including existing, new, and updated nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans under the UNFCCC. Regarding paragraph 7, on the development of guidance on nature-based solutions, Canada notes that although the document detailing the outcomes of the intergovernmental consultations on NBS to be prepared for UNEA 6 is not available yet, we do have UNEA Resolution 55, which, as New Zealand noted, clearly defines nature-based solutions and provides an important guide for our work. We fully support a request for the preparation of guidance on the application of UNEA Resolution 55 in the context of the Convention, and will make a slight change to paragraph 7 to reflect this. Canada would further like to suggest that parties be engaged in reviewing the guidance prepared by the Executive Secretary through a notification process. Regarding paragraph 8, Canada notes that COP15 adopted the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development and requested the Executive Secretary to enable the preparation of thematic action plans for specific targets or groups of related targets, which would include targets 8 and 11. In that vein, we think it would be pertinent to recall Decision 15.8 in the preambular paragraphs, and we question whether paragraph 8 is necessary. We will submit specific text suggestions in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. I'll give the floor to Japan, followed by Saudi Arabia and Chile.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a rich discussion at COP15 about biodiversity and climate change, and this agenda item is crucial for taking action on both global environmental crises. Japan considers that the COP decision 14/5 on biodiversity and climate change adopted by parties at COP14 should serve as the basis of our discussion. In addition, we should be also mindful that useful scientific knowledge and information obtained after COP14, which could help us to address this issue in a more scientifically relevant manner. It's important to address the crisis of biodiversity loss and climate change simultaneously, as these issues are intertwined. In this context, Japan supports the recommendation as it includes the need for an integrated approach to biodiversity and climate change. Japan will submit our proposals for text changes in writing, including the matters related to NBS and EBA. We consider such approaches should be applied according to the national context of each party. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. So far, I've been here the recognition of the importance of climate change and the need to work in a more integrated way, considering different approaches. There is no doubt. And I invite you to apply the adaptive management of your statements, please, to go to the recommendations. There's only 8 paragraphs on the recommendation part. So how many changes you are suggesting in order to ensure that we will work in the convention on the technical elements to support our efforts to address climate change, please. Now I'll give the floor to Saudi Arabia, followed by Chile and Eswatini.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair. I'm going to focus on the recommendations. Recommendation 3, concerning the preservation of biodiversity and its restoration. We have to focus on adaptation and mitigating the impact of climate change. One has to here include natural disasters and their impact, and this is in keeping with Objective 11. Now, in terms of nature-based solutions, we believe that one should refer to the good, the appropriate implementation. This would mean that thus far, we have not yet come up with the right concept, the right approach in terms of nature-based solutions. And there are a number of diverging views and opinions regarding these very questions. What we would propose is that IPBES be the body which will summarize, review, and come up with a definition for these concepts. Thank you.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia, and thank you so much for being very clear and precise in your recommendations. I'll give the floor to Chile, followed by Eswatini. And, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah. And thanks to the Secretariat for the work carried out. On this agenda item, I would like to briefly share the Chilean experience establishing synergies between the climate change and biodiversity agendas. Our country is working on defining the biodiversity adaptation plan to climate change. Although this plan is still in preparation, it includes nature-based solutions and climate change instruments in biodiversity. In the field of mitigation, Chile has included nature-based solutions approach in the climate change law as an important tool to achieve carbon neutrality. Other national policies that includes the biodiversity variable, the long-term climate strategy, and our NDC to the Paris Agreement presented in 2020. In summary, Mr. Chair, there are some of the approaches that we are working on and that are aligned with the document on conclusion of the 6th evaluation report of the IPCC and its repercussions on the work carried out in the context of the Convention of Biodiversity. On the recommendations, particularly for Chile, we appreciate and we consider them as a minimum floor. However, we would like to urge the parties to increase their ambition in the recommendations with a language which makes echo on the sense of urgency for climate action with the respective synergies on the biodiversity agenda. I thank you, Chair.
Gracias, Chile. I'll give the floor to Eswatini, followed by Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eswatini has the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the Africa Group. The Africa Group appreciates the efforts of the documents that have been prepared for this agenda item. In this regard, the group wishes to remind parties of the convention that this convention have done in developing a clear, well-defined and methodological framework for addressing biodiversity and climate change in the form of ecosystem-based approaches. Furthermore, Africa wishes to remind parties that in the context of this convention, it is critical to focus on ecosystem restoration and enhancements of ecosystem services to protect society against negative impacts of climate change, which is the basis for any synergies with the climate change multilateral purposes. Any concept that commodifies nature and does not contribute to the protection and/or enhancement of our ecosystems' adaptive capacity to climate change does not contribute to the attainment of this convention's objective. Mr. Chair, it is in that spirit that Africa believes that welcoming the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report without acknowledging and welcoming the IPBES assessment in the draft recommendation is an oversight that needs to be corrected. The group further expresses its concern over the singling out of the Paris Agreement in the draft recommendations, which we strongly believe should always be associated with its mother convention, the UNFCCC, which outlines overarching principles that are applicable under the UNFCCC. Mr. Chair, Africa takes note of the work under the UNEP in compliance with the UNEA Resolution 5 on nature-based solution for supporting sustainable development and the IGC process under UNEA, while taking cognizance of the importance and value of nature-based solution. Africa also reiterate that the convention adopted ecosystem-based approaches and associated guidelines, which is the current guiding framework for issues of biodiversity and climate change. However, considering the divergences around the interpretation and implementation of nature-based solutions, Africa called for the deferment of the adoption of paragraph 7 and 8 to allow for greater clarity on the standards and criteria and to provide concrete guidance. The Africa Group therefore requests the Secretariat to further engage with UNEA in this regard. Mr. Chair, we will be submitting our submissions, which will be in the form of track changes and will also contain other changes that the group would like to introduce in the recommendation. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you to Eswatini speaking on behalf of African states. Now I'll give the floor to Egypt, followed by Spain and Sweden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, Egypt strongly supports Estonian intervention on behalf of Africa, as well as other African delegates on this agenda item number 7. As you know, Mr. Chairman, previous CBD decisions have shown that there are urgent needs to tackle climate change and nature crisis in an integrated manner. That's through long-term strategies. Therefore, parties are encouraged to assess, manage, and avoid potential adverse effects and impacts on biodiversity using the existing tools, especially those related to the ecosystem-based approach. Yes, indeed, we welcome the IPCC 6 assessment report, which states very clearly conserving and restoring ecosystems are feasible, effective, and low-cost options for climate change mitigation and adaptation. If we work together, we shall be able to achieve GBF targets 8 and 11 easily. Mr. Chair, I would like to bring the attention to the intervention by German colleague who referred to new partnerships between Egypt and Germany on nature-based solutions. This is well appreciated, and we hope such partnerships could help in resolving all of these issues related to the biodiversity conventions. Mr. Chair, we all aware of the UN General Assembly Resolution 76/300 on human rights to a clean and healthy environment. We know during the last few years, a large number of UN engineering field experiments have been implemented in many parts of our planets as means for climate change solutions. Therefore, all CBD parties attending this SBSTTA-25 should affirm precaution and prevent geoengineering from harming biodiversity, the environment, the climate, and the right of indigenous people and the human rights of local communities. We hope CBD Secretariat will be able to deal with this issue and report back to us on this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jip. Ahora doy la palabra a España, seguido de Suiza y Argentina.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair. Spain is working to tackle the climate crisis and the loss of biodiversity. It's trying to increase the level of ambition and the time set out to achieve our objectives. We would like to highlight the multi-directional relationship between climate change and biodiversity and highlight the role played by nature-based solutions and by ecosystem-based approaches in order to face up to environmental challenges. These approaches contribute to conserving nature and combating desertification. In this regard, Spain would propose that the text reflects the need for closer collaboration between IPBES, IPCC, and between the various Rio Conventions. Spain would like to urge all parties to take into account the interactions between climate change and the loss of biodiversity in order to incorporate these in national planning, monitoring, control, and review processes, in order to feed into national action plans and strategies in terms of biodiversity, nationally determined contributions, long-term strategies, and adaptation plans. Spain will work together with the parties to ensure that SBSTTA-25 proposes a decision which is sufficiently ambitious for consideration and adoption at COP16. Finally, we inform you that Spain proposes the exploration of different sources of financing in order to tackle climate change and the loss of biodiversity in a joint manner, ensuring that the plurality of actors involved in tackling both challenges, from the private sector to indigenous peoples and local communities, can all contribute to this necessary resource mobilization. We have sent in our comments in writing as well. Thank you very much.
Gracias, España. Pues sigue la lista.
Thank you, Spain. Now we still have around 40 requests for the floor. And I continue to hear that we need to be inclusive in considering other alternatives and tools in order to tackle climate change, and also in terms of restoration, nature-based solutions, ecosystem-based approaches, in relation to financing, restoration. To various elements, there's also collaboration with IPBES, IPCC, and even with the Rio Conventions. I would ask you to try and go to the technical part here of the recommendations and not have political discussions. Perhaps we can leave political discussions to the COP. That would perhaps be better. So if we don't have time to give the floor to all the observers, I hope they understand our situation, because we also need to broach other documents as well. So please help me to maybe keep all these statements as brief as possible so that everyone can share their opinions. I now give the floor to Sweden, followed by Gabon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Biodiversity and climate change solutions and challenges are intimately interconnected. Trade-offs should be avoided and synergies sought, as recognized in Target 8 of the Kunming-Montreal GBF. Picking up where we left off under Agenda Item 4, Sweden welcomes a balanced reflection of the biodiversity-relevant findings of IPCC AR6 within a SBSTTA-25 recommendation under this agenda item. This means that besides the significant impact of climate change on biodiversity and ecosystem services, Sweden recognizes the important role of conservation and restoration, nature-based solutions, and ecosystem-based approaches for climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, increasing resilience to climate change impacts, and for climate change mitigation. In the SBSTTA-25 recommendations, Sweden supports implementing strong social and environmental safeguards when taking action to implement GBF Targets 8 and 11, and promotes a human rights-based approach and the full and effective participation of rights holders in line with GBF Target 22. As co-chair of the Bern 3 Conference on Cooperation among the Biodiversity-related Conventions for the implementation of the GBF, Sweden lifts the potential of deeper cooperation between the CBD and the UNFCCC, as well as the Third Rio Convention, the UNCCD. Sweden emphasizes, in particular, that achieving the goals and mission of the Kunming-Montreal GBF is not possible without urgent and effective action on climate change in line with the Paris Agreement, and vice versa. Sweden encourages further IPES-IPCC interaction when relevant. These panels' science-based, policy-oriented work provides an underpinning of well-founded measures taken to address climate change and biodiversity challenges and their links to other crises. Chair, like Spain and others, Sweden supports robust SBSTTA-25 recommendations under this agenda item. We capture our approach in detailed written comments, which are broadly aligned with the Vilm report. Thank you.
Gracias. Doy la palabra a Argentina.
Thank you. I give the floor to Argentina, followed by Gabon, Australia, and South Africa.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. Argentina, as a signatory of the CBD and the UNFCCC, reiterates its commitments to biodiversity and the fight against climate change. On the draft recommendation, Argentina recalls that the mandate of the COP is limited to reviewing the visions of parties relating to biodiversity and climate change. With this in mind, we would like to make the following amendment suggestions. First, Argentina maintains its position with regards to the specific mention of the workshop co-sponsored by IPBES and IPCC on biodiversity and climate change. We believe that COP15 and previous SBSTA meetings have exhausted debate in this matter, and it's not necessary to reopen this question. Second, we believe that the draft recommendation should adequately reflect the interdependent challenges of the loss of biodiversity, climate change, desertification, and land degradation, amongst many other environmental challenges which are all interconnected. In addition, we believe that tackling these challenges should take into account the specific legal structure of environmental multilateralism. In this regard, tackling the relationships between biodiversity and climate change should be cohesive, but not necessarily integrated. Thirdly, the recognition of the interdependence between climate change and loss of biodiversity is recognized by Argentina. Argentina believes that contributions to biodiversity of climate change are relevant. Fourth, we have some suggested modifications on the measures to be taken by the parties in order to ensure adaptability and flexibility in the implementation of national strategies. Fifth, on financing, it's essential that we reiterate the obligations of developed countries. We propose focusing this point on the implementation of the CBD and remove references to other interested parties in order to emphasize the primary responsibility of the parties to the Convention. Finally, we would ask to know how the request to review the outcomes of the intergovernmental consultations on nature-based solutions will be implemented. It is our understanding that those consultations did not have formal outcomes, since there was no mandate for that. We believe that these amendments will refine and strengthen our collective action in order to preserve biodiversity and combat climate change. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Argentina.
Thank you, Argentina. And thank you for going straight to the point and the recommendations. Now, I give the floor to Gabon, followed by Australia, South Africa, and Kuwait.
Merci. Thank you so much, Chair, and good evening, dear colleagues. So, we should like to start by voicing our support for the statement made by Eswatini on behalf of the Africa Group, and also to back the content of the recommendations contained in document CBD-Subsidiary-2512. For the crises of biodiversity and climate are closely linked and mutually exacerbating, while maintaining the reservation voiced by Eswatini regarding recommendations 7 and 8. So, in your summary, you took into account all of the concerns contained in Gabon's statement, so I'm not going to revisit all of this. And to save time, I'm just going to stress two elements. Now, the first element is that we have to take into account issues of climate change over and beyond targets 8 and 11 if we truly want to fully achieve the objectives of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Now, to this end, we believe that incorporating these concerns should also happen in terms of targets 2 and 4. And the second idea is that if we genuinely want to tackle this issue of interaction between climate change and biodiversity, we believe that it is important to carry out a gap and shortcomings analysis related to the taking into account of climate considerations in the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This is all we're going to do because in your summary you have covered all of our concerns. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Gabon. I'll give the floor to Australia, followed by South Africa, Kuwait, and Nigeria.
Thank you, Chair. Like Canada, Australia seeks text changes to paragraph 6 to bring biodiversity action up front and better reflect that CBD finance should primarily focus on biodiversity action first, with climate mitigation and adaptation co-benefits. The current wording is potentially misleading in the context of this forum, as it infers that the CBD finance should be pushed towards any or all climate mitigation and adaptation action, which could include biodiversity action. We will submit our proposed amendment directly to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now South Africa, followed by Kuwait, Nigeria, and Equatorial Guinea.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa supports and endorses the statement made by Eswatini on behalf of Africa. South Africa is concerned that only 26 submissions were received by the Secretariat from 8 parties and 18 international organizations, as highlighted by the note from the Secretariat. South Africa is of the view that a greater number of submissions would have greatly enriched the depth of ideas and inputs for the process. Chair, the mandate of this convention is to manage biodiversity and ecosystems in a way that enhances structural integrity and function in order to mount resilience against climate change and to deliver the goods and services that sustain livelihoods across the globe. Given the latter, the focus should be on enhancing and scaling up on ecosystem-based approaches and disaster risk reduction measures to monitor and report results of projects implemented post the adoption of EBA. The Working Group 2 report of the IPCC's 6th Assessment Report highlighted the following aspects about nature-based solutions. First is that there is a need for an assessment framework on the effectiveness and efficiency of nature-based solutions in providing ecosystem and benefits to society. The second is that the evidence base for nature-based solutions has substantial gaps, and most of the evidence is from the global north. And lastly, there is also a lack of robust site-specific investigations of the effectiveness of the interventions compared to other alternative approaches which are more holistic in nature and provide more social and ecological benefits. In addition, Chair, South Africa has just finished a detailed scientific assessment of nature-based solutions, advantages, and factors determining its potential success in the context of our country. The results are very much in agreement with the IPCC's assessment, with other additional gaps highlighted. Furthermore, there is a need to understand the thresholds and limits of nature-based solutions under various climate scenarios of a world that is 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, and 3 degrees Celsius warmer respectively. It is clear, Chair, that we are nowhere near a consensus on the concept of nature-based solutions, as alluded to by many countries. Given this, South Africa supports Eswatini's statement on behalf of Africa to defer paragraphs 7 and 8 of the recommendations until there is a globally agreed set of guidelines for the implementation of nature-based solutions. We will submit our text proposals together with this intervention. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. Now is the turn to Kuwait, followed by Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea, and Cuba.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The state of Kuwait appreciates the efforts in order to face the climate change as well as the impact on biodiversity. The state of Kuwait would like to integrate nature-based solutions on our national strategy. This reflects our commitment in this regard. We have taken a number of steps in order to protect biodiversity. The state of Kuwait supports all the green initiative launched by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as well as the Mangrove Alliance launched by the United Arab Emirates. We have taken a number of procedures in order to address climate change and biodiversity loss. These include the establishment of marine and land reserve areas. We have established a number of projects in order to increase the green area. We planted a number of mangrove trees as well as cedar trees. These will focus on addressing the negative consequences of biodiversity loss. We focus on the UNFCCC, and we are going to submit our comments in writing. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kuwait. Now, Nigeria, followed by Equatorial Guinea, Cuba, and Belgium.
Thank you, Chair. Nigeria would like to welcome the note from the Secretariat on this agenda item, which provides an overview of the findings of the assessment that are relevant to biodiversity and their linkages for the work under the Convention, especially on the 6th assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, and the report of the IPBES IPCC Biodiversity and Climate Change Workshop. Nigeria would like to acknowledge the IPBES report that recognizes the linkages between climate change and biodiversity loss. We would like to have a clear reference to the IPBES report on the recommendations under this agenda item. We would like to emphasize on the need to explore connections between climate change and biodiversity. We are concerned about the accelerating impact of climate change on biodiversity and on the capacity of ecosystems to provide their functions and services, including for climate adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction, and about the serious implication of these findings for the work under the Convention. We welcome the recommendation noting UNEA Resolution 5x5 on implementing NBS for sustainable development and its potential in providing guidance to the implementation of Target 8 and 11 of the KMGBF. Thank you very much. Okay, Nigeria would like to recommend that this should be the reference point for paragraph 7 rather than the just concluded IGC on NBS, which will only produce an information document to UNEA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigeria. Now, Guinea Equatorial, followed by Cuba, Belgium, and Sudan.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair. Equatorial Guinea also takes on the position of the African group as presented by Eswatini, in particular on the integration of climate change and biodiversity. We welcome the aspects mentioned in the recommendations, in particular relating to the publication of the 6th IPCC report. As you know, the parties to the CBD are also drafting the 7th report, and we believe that with the synergies of these two instruments, Chair, we can provide added value in addition to the Rio Conventions in order to mitigate the adverse effects of the climate change and conserve and ensure the sustainable use of biodiversity. the link between climate change and biodiversity is inherent, and this is clearly shown. Nevertheless, the reality on the ground is very difficult. Most countries who have rich biodiversity and which are the great guardians and protectors of the planet are effectively those that are most vulnerable to the harmful effects of climate change. In their majority, they are underdeveloped countries, and they have difficulties in terms of technical and economical means in order to design and implement policies which are adequate given the current context. Chair, my country therefore suggests that recommendation 6 is reformulated to not be just a way to urge parties to increase their investments, but to be something completely binding for countries, and refers to climate change so they take on greater responsibilities with regards to non-Annex 1 countries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Equatorial Guinea, and I'll give the floor to Cuba, followed by Belgium, Sudan, and Korea. Republic of Korea.
This statement is made on behalf of Small Islands Development State attending in this meeting. I must add that Peru also supports this statement. The Small Island Development State present welcome the publication of the 6th Assessment Report, or the IPCC, the IPBES IPCC co-sponsor workshop on biodiversity and climate change and its workshop report, and would like to thank the Secretariat for the work in the preparation of the document on biodiversity and climate change that we are discussing right now. The IPBES IPCC co-sponsor workshop on biodiversity and climate report recognized that we must limit global warming in order to protect biodiversity and achieve sustainable, equitable benefits for all people, providing a suitable habitat for all nature. We note that the achievement of the goal and mission of the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is inextricably linked to urgent and effective action on climate change as a direct driver of biodiversity loss. Biodiversity underpins the integrity and stability of ecosystem. It is the foundation on which long-term carbon storage in ecosystem is built. Retaining and recovering biodiversity is essential for retaining and recovering ecosystem integrity and carbon stocks. Further, the IPCC 6th Assessment Report has indicated that protection, improved management, and restoration of forests, wetlands, savannas, grassland, and other ecosystems can have the largest potential to sequester carbon. For many decades, relevant international scientific institutions have recognized the effects of constant increase of temperatures on the sea level rise around the world, and how these consequences are already affecting the existing ecosystem in our low-lying coastal country. In its 6th report that refers in draft decision, IPCC gives more inputs about these climate change impacts over our coastal line. In line with Article 20 of the Convention, for SIDS is crucial the scale of investment directly for restoring a protection ecosystem according to the actions previously defined in our MBSAP. And we also recognize the co-benefits of this intervention to climate change resilience. So, it is also required to make the arrangement to avoid double accountability in the provision of financial resources in climate change versus biodiversity. Regarding intergovernmental consultation on nature-based solutions, we appreciate a lot effort from the UNEP Secretary and the distinguished co-chair from Costa Rica and Nigeria, and we affirm our vision that a long way should be walked first. So, we are agreed that the Secretary of CTV, taking into consideration this UNEP process, works with Member States in the logical insertion of NBS in function of implementation of Target 8. We will submit edits of the document to the Secretariat with proposal in paragraph 4, 6, and 7, according to our statement. Thank you, Chair.
Gracias, Cuba.
Thank you, Cuba.
your cooperation because there's still more than 30 requests to the floor, and we need to have established limits and to move on. I have a list of parties and observers. I will name the parties. After Cuba is Belgium, Sudan, Korea, DRC, Finland, UK, France, Colombia, Cook Islands, Chad, Netherlands, Benin, Lebanon, Norway, Costa Rica, India, Italy, and Russia. So I would like to close the list. Otherwise, this will definitely we will need to establish a contact group, given the so many changes to the 8 paragraphs we have in the recommendation. And I feel very bad to close options for observers. I will limit to few interventions from observers, from IPLCs, UNDRR, IUCN, Ramsar, Youth, Women, and one of NGOs to move forward. I apologize for other participants that like to take the floor, but we need to have a limit. We need to have space also to continue working with the following documents. Anyway, we need to establish a contact group. There will be opportunity there to move on. So please count with your support to be precise on recommendations once again. We know it's important, this topic. I made a summary of the main points that have been heard, including recognition to marine ecosystems. This is something new, and we mainly have a political discussion between nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches. I believe any action that can help to address climate change in support of biodiversity should be welcome, but this is my opinion. It's up to you how to proceed. So I invite you to be concrete and to send good advice to the Conference of the Parties in how to address this topic in the light of our framework, our new framework, please. Now with this, I'll give the floor to Belgium, followed by Sudan, Korea, and DRC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would like to thank the Secretariat for the documents provided and for the draft recommendations, which are a good basis for further work. And I would ask for your indulgence. The points that I will raise are points that are linked to amendments that we will send in, or points which are already in the text, but which we feel are important to highlight in order to make sure that they're not disappearing. We would like to highlight the following 4 elements from the submission. First, the impact of climate change, but also, of course, the impact of climate action on biodiversity. Thirdly, also the role of biodiversity to address climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction. And fourthly, the importance of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches in this regard. And we find it important to address these elements in recommendations from this subset for adoption at COP16. Belgium shares the conclusion in the note from the Secretariat that new or updated guidance could be prepared, taking into account the variety of actors which are involved and the value of diverse knowledge and values, and the need for coherence, complementarity, and synergy in the work undertaken under the Convention and related processes. Furthermore, like many others have mentioned here, we would like to emphasize the need to avoid working in silos for addressing climate change and biodiversity loss, advocating instead for a holistic approach that maximizes synergies, also with other challenges such as desertification, land degradation, and pollution. For that reason, Belgium strongly supports that nature-based solutions for sustainable development, as defined by UNEA, and also ecosystem-based approaches are embedded into the revised national biodiversity strategies and action plans, the nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, and other long-term strategies, as has been reflected in paragraph 4b. In that regard, I would also like to add that Belgium is taking a lot of initiative on nature-based solutions for adaptation and resilience, and that we are honored to mention that we will join the Egyptian ENACT initiative. On agenda item 4D regarding IPCC findings, we believe that it would be useful to have their recommendations integrated into the ones for this agenda item for adoption at COP16. And we support the continuation and reinforcement of the cooperation between IPBES and the IPCC, of course avoiding any duplication of work and aiming for a holistic approach. Furthermore, we would like to request for a compilation of information on carbon and biodiversity credits and offsets and other approaches, and their effects on biodiversity. This to allow for a well-informed exchange of views on these concepts at Substa prior to COP17. Finally, Belgium would like to request to bring these recommendations to the attention of their UNFCCC and UNCCD counterparts in order to discuss it in the context of the joint liaison group of the Rio Conventions and to assess options for better integration, including consideration for establishing a joint work program to operationalize the integration
Please
in
conclude.
future COPs. I will send in my comments in writing. Thank you very much.
I'll give the floor to Sudan, followed by Korea and DRC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Sudan supports the Swatini statement on behalf of Africa. Regarding linkages between biodiversity and the climate change, we believe that all state parties to the CBD, UNCCD, UNFCCC should be encouraged to work together at the national level. This synergy would reinforce the efforts exerted to achieve biodiversity, prevent land degradation, and address climate change. This will also help avoid negative consequences on biodiversity. In the meantime, we look forward to building the capacities of developing countries, small island countries, countries of economies in transition in order to work together hand in hand. The CBD has exerted a lot of efforts in this regard. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Much Sudan. Now Korea, followed by DRC and Finland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Republic of Korea would like to thank the Secretary for their work on this important matter. Korea recognizes that biodiversity and climate change are intricately linked. It is important to integrate climate change consideration when implementing the GBF. In particular, action to directly support Target 8 and 11, and indirectly Target 2, 4, and 12. Last week's consultations on nature-based solutions, many countries highlighted the need for well-defined criteria, standards, and guidelines for MBS in alignment with biodiversity and ecosystem conservation and restoration. Our view is that the MBS and the ecosystem-based approach can address climate change issues and other societal problems, acting as a key connector between efforts to mitigate climate impacts and to conserve biodiversity. Therefore, we welcome the draft recommendation which requests the Secretary to review the outcomes of the intergovernmental consultation on MBS under UNEA. In particular, the call for clear and comprehensive standards, guidelines, and safeguards for the MBS actions in order to scale up the MBS implementation in strong alignment with the biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, to be shared among relevant international conventions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Korea. Now the floor, DRC, followed by Finland and UK.
Merci. Thank you so much for affording me the floor. The Democratic Republic of Congo strongly supports a statement made by Swatini on behalf of the African Group. Chair, human activity, driven by the need for technological and industrial development, has resulted in climate change. Climate change has a negative impact on biodiversity. For this reason, the integration of biodiversity and climate change should be widely promoted, including in terms of resource mobilization and cooperation between IPBES and the IPCC. In paragraph 2 of the document, currently under consideration, we found it odd that only the IPCC report was mentioned, without any reference to the work of IPBES in this field, to wit, the platform of the Convention on Biological Diversity. The DRC believes that targets 2, 3, 8, 11, 18, and 19 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework are especially relevant in terms of highlighting actions to combat the unbridled erosion of biodiversity and the adverse effects of climate change. In point G of this document, the DRC believes that the creation of the Special Fund for Biodiversity under the aegis of the Convention on Biological Diversity, in accordance with Articles 20, 21, and 39 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, is essential to boost investment and financial support for biodiversity, with a particular view to increase the resilience of living beings in the face of the effects of climate change. Sir, it is said that the patient man eats ripe fruit. The DRC believes that it is still too early to fully transpose nature-based solutions into biodiversity conservation actions, as this process is still evolving. And the concept has not yet been fully negotiated in all of its dimensions and aspects. While these solutions have been accepted by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, they still have some way to go. Some way to go before they are accepted by the Convention on Biological Diversity. Prudence would dictate that we should first firmly establish the ecosystem-based approaches that are already well developed and approved before embracing the nature-based solutions, which still suffer from an absence of guidelines and other important details. For this reason, and in the absence of a consensus regarding nature-based solutions at this stage, we would be grateful, sir, if you would delete paragraphs 7 and 8 of the draft recommendations. I thank you.
Thank you, DRC. Now I'll give the floor to Finland, followed by UK and France.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Finland supports the intervention made by New Zealand. Finland appreciates and recognizes the valuable work done and the recent findings from reports by the IPBES and IPCC and the ongoing joint activities. It is undeniably clear that we are not on track to meet the emissions reduction targets, nor are we doing enough to stop biodiversity loss that is happening at an alarming speed. We would like to stress that biodiversity loss and climate change are mutually reinforcing and share many of the same drivers. We need joint actions to address this crisis of our times. If we fail to do this, the results are irreversible consequences for the planet and its people. Finland therefore proposes that the substance sends a strong message about the urgency to step up efforts and implementation to address climate change and biodiversity loss in an integrated manner. It is important to strengthen synergies between the Rio Conventions, biodiversity-related conventions, and other relevant environmental conventions. All countries must update and mainstream these targets into their nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, as well as the MBSAPs and the overall implementation of the GPF. This includes also aligning the financial flows and making them consistent with our targets. We should in particular address threats to vulnerable areas impacted by climate change, such as mountains, coastal and marine ecosystems, and those situated in small island states, the Arctic and the Antarctic. Climate change is by far the worst threat to the Arctic biodiversity. This has consequences for people and communities that are directly dependent on ecosystem services and functions. Therefore, it is important to enable full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth in designing and implementing measures for adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction. Finland promotes nature-based solutions, especially ecosystem restoration with social and environmental safeguards. These are at the heart of reaching our targets. They offer a feasible and cost-effective way to increase much-needed mitigation, resilience, and adaptation while generating multiple co-benefits for nature and society. We have amendments to the recommendations, and we will give the detailed text proposals in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Give the floor to UK, followed by France and Colombia.
Thank you, Chair. The UK is grateful to the Executive Secretary for preparing this draft decision. We feel it is vital that we agree a strong decision given the importance of these interdependent challenges. We would like to share our views on this decision and our proposed amendments, which we have also submitted in writing. The interlinkages between biodiversity and climate change are multifaceted and multidirectional. We also feel that the findings from the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report detailed in document SBSTTA-25/9 should be integrated into this decision rather than a standalone decision under Agenda Item 4 to ensure that actions are underpinned by evidence. Action and science should not be treated separately. It is vital that this decision supports the implementation of Targets 8 and 11. As such, we support the request to the Executive Secretary, currently in the draft decision, to produce guidance for these targets for consideration at COP16. This should be moved to Substa, so work can begin immediately, and should be informed by a broader range of sources, including the UNEA Resolution 5/5, as stated by a number of parties. We share the views of Germany and the EU regarding the importance of the voluntary guidelines of ecosystem-based approaches to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, and our regret that an equivalent does not exist for mitigation. As such, we are also requesting the Executive Secretary to update these guidelines to consider mitigation. Unlike the guidance for Targets 8 and 11, which will be aimed at parties to the CBD, these broader guidelines would be highly valuable to practitioners, organizations, and other activities related to the implementation of nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches, including those under other conventions such as the UNFCCC. Finally, we feel this decision should promote synergies with and between other conventions, scientific bodies, and activities related to biodiversity and climate change, to ensure these challenges are addressed in an integrated manner. We are supportive of the elements in the draft decision and those proposed by others, including Canada and New Zealand, that aim to do this, and are proposing additional elements, including inviting the UNFCCC to consider the voluntary guidelines, as well as the IPCC and IPBES to consider the design and implementation of nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches in their work programme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UK. Just to let you know, and in order to save number of documents, I had conversations with the Secretariat and going with the idea to integrate documents, those documents from IPBES with invasive species. I guess we can do that with climate change and also sustainable use, to have in a single place this thing and to save time, but I need your help, please. Please go to comments on recommendations. I still listen to a lot of context. Everybody wants to work together, to be inclusive, to consider IPCC, to consider IPBES. We've been listening to this many times, and I hope you can focus on the recommendations. We have ecosystem-based approaches, nature-based solutions, support, and not support to this. Maybe just to be very clear with you, maybe we will have, this is more a political discussion rather than technical from my point of view. We will end probably with one paragraph making reference to nature-based solutions in brackets and maybe other elements. So we all together want to address this. So let's try to focus and to be very clear, considering what will be the end of this, trying to be more technical. Seems we're more in a discussion, a political discussion, rather than really technical. We want to consider adaptation, mitigation, restoration, different ecosystems, including Arctics. So we need to put this all together, but I want to see something really parties are doing to address biodiversity and the harm of climate change. Sorry about that, but we need to move on. This is very precious time. We have translation in 6 languages. We need to move on, and we are like in cycles having more political discussions. Please help me to do this. I'm in your hands. Now I give the floor to France, followed by Colombia and Cook Islands.
Merci. Thank you so much, Chair. France welcomes the documents presented by the Secretariat and wishes to convey its gratitude to you for the summarizing work carried out following consultations between the links between climate change and biodiversity, which results in an inclusive and transparent process. The recommendations proposed are a solid basis for discussions on this topic, which constitute a priority for France. In the context of the implementation of the Global Framework for Biodiversity, it is important that the subsidiary body prepares a bold decision on this topic by focusing on its scientific and technical dimensions. In this respect, France wishes to associate itself with other delegations who have taken the floor and propose a number of amendments to the recommendations were proposed with the following objectives. Strengthen synergy between actions to preserve biodiversity and the fight against climate change in terms of adaptation, mitigation, and reduction of risks of natural disasters. Strengthen the links between the work of the IPCC and the Rio Conventions. And IPBES, welcome nature-based solutions as agreed by UNEA 5. We want to underscore the vulnerability, but also the special role played by forest and marine ecosystems faced with the independent challenges of climate change and the loss of biodiversity, to limit the negative impact of misadaptation of biodiversity on ecosystems, including through decarbonization trajectories which are compatible with the preservation of biodiversity, and finally to preserve environmental corridors for migrating species in the context of climate change. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, France. I doy la palabra a Colombia.
And I give the floor to Colombia, followed by Cook Islands.
Mr. Chair, this statement is made on behalf of Colombia, Costa Rica, Chile, Mexico, República Dominicana, and Peru, to emphasize that our country are currently facing the associated problems of biodiversity loss, climate change, and desertification. Therefore, these challenges must be addressed in a comprehensive manner, making it as a priority to articulate the climate and biodiversity agendas to ensure complementary efforts for sustainable development, and to include in the long-term strategies nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches for climate change and its effects, disaster risk reduction, and mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. In this regard, we suggest increased global climate ambition by putting biodiversity and indigenous and local communities at the forefront, establish joint action plans between NBSAPs and NDCs, provide urgent signals of biodiversity conservation status to be included in the global stocktake. In this context, it is important to highlight the need for technical and financial support so that the countries can implement our strategies for the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of biological diversity, given the contribution of ecosystems to mitigation and adaptation of climate change. We also support the statement made by Cuba on behalf of small island states on the topic of the intergovernmental consultation of nature-based solutions. Besides of that, Colombia has some specific comments on the text that we are going to share with the Secretary. Thank you.
Gracias, Colombia.
Thank you, Colombia. Now, Cook Islands, followed by Chad and Netherlands.
Thank you, Chair. The Cook Islands is speaking on behalf of the Pacific Island countries in attendance today and would like to align ourselves with New Zealand and Cuba on behalf of the small island developing states. Chair, we would like to note the following. 1, we welcome and support the recommendations under CBD/Substa/25/12. 2, Indigenous peoples and local communities have a wealth of knowledge and expertise when it comes to sustainably managing the environment. The role of traditional knowledge and practices must therefore be recognized, given due respect, and incorporated into appropriate mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction actions to increase resilience to climate change. We welcome the full participation of IPLCs in achieving all of the GBF targets. 3, Technical capacity and resources are limited in the Pacific. We echo the need to scale up investments to facilitate rapid implementation of the targets, as noted in paragraphs 6 and 8 of Section 4, and therefore encourage financial flow from developed to developing countries to further support this. 4, we recognize that nature-based solutions are not a substitute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and implore developed countries and industries to urgently reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to minimize negative impacts of climate change on biodiversity. Lastly, it is crucial to bridge the gaps between climate change and biodiversity programs and actions, to streamline climate consideration into the implementation of the GBF. Solutions to the identified gaps and approved actions must be integrated within national policy frameworks to optimize co-benefits and ensure that our biodiversity is safeguarded to slowly adapt to climate change. Our full statement has been submitted to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to Chad, followed by Netherlands and Benin.
Thank you so much, Chair. The Republic of Chad wishes to back the statement made by Swatini on behalf of the Africa Group, as well as the specific statements made by all African states. Furthermore, for Chad, one of the consequences of climate change which needs to be underscored is the issue of migration, which is increasing, and there is a need, therefore, to take this into account in draft strategies aimed at improving the resilience of smart livestock rearing. The effects of climate change also impact vulnerable groups, amongst them African communities, which possess a great deal of knowledge regarding biodiversity in the regions where they have lived for generations, and which use methods which have proven themselves in terms of sustaining this biodiversity. For the Republic of Chad, they're taken into account in our decisions of the assessment of the knowledge of local communities with biodiversity, and their knowledge of biodiversity is a precondition for elaborating effective strategies for combating the loss of biodiversity. We therefore urge SBSTTA to incorporate this variable in all of its future work. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chad. Netherlands, followed by Benin and Lebanon.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. Chair. The Netherlands would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing the note on biodiversity and climate change. The Netherlands recognizes the interlinkages between climate change and biodiversity and stresses that climate change is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss. At the same time, biodiversity conservation, ecosystem restoration, and sustainable use of biodiversity contribute to climate mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction. Nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches have enormous potential to tackle multiple challenges and crises in conjunction and to support sustainable development. It is essential that we adopt a holistic approach in which synergies between biodiversity and climate change are maximized to effectively implement the GBF, as well as the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. As such, the Netherlands supports strengthened cooperation between IPBES and IPCC, between the CBD and UNFCCC, as well as strengthened integrated approaches at the national level, such as NBCEPs, national determined commitments, and national adaptation plans. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Netherlands. Now, Benin, followed by Lebanon and Norway.
Thank you so much, sir. Benin backs a statement made by Eswatini on behalf of the Africa Group on document currently being considered. Benin also backs a statement made by Japan and Belgium regarding their vision of nature-based solutions as an element for sustainable development. Benin commends the convention for its openness regarding climate change via multiple targets in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, notably Target 8 of the framework, which calls for minimizing the impacts of climate change and ocean acidification on biodiversity and enhancing biodiversity resilience through mitigation and adaptation measures. Benin supports the paper's conclusions regarding nature-based solutions to fight against climate change for genuine sustainable development. Benin believes that sustainable development is not possible without ecosystemic approaches and nature-based solutions, given the issue of farming, the way farming and fishing is practiced by the population of Benin. We believe that it is urgent that this concept be sufficiently clarified within the context of the CBD. Benin proposes that clear guidelines be drawn up with indicators which can be operationalized in the context of biodiversity and nature-based solutions to reinforce the current document. Benin has already sent his comments to the Secretariat. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Benin. Now Lebanon, followed by Norway and Costa Rica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lebanon welcomes the note by the CBD Secretariat on Biodiversity and Climate Change in documents CBD Substat-25/12 and the proposed recommendations to the COP16, which will set the means to support the implementations of targets 8 and 11 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which address biodiversity and climate change, as well as other targets that support this topic, such as the targets 1, 2, 3, and 10 that directly contribute to adaptation to and mitigation of climate change. We welcome specifically that the draft decision to the COP16 on biodiversity and climate change recognizes that achievement of the Paris Agreement and the GBF are interdependent and calls for synergies and coherence between national climate and biodiversity strategies, action plans, and commitments. Thus, we strongly support the text of paragraph 2, stating that the achievement of the goals and mission of the Global Biodiversity Framework is not possible without urgent and effective action on climate change in line with the Paris Agreement, and the text of paragraph 4b calling the parties to integrate nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches to climate change adaptations, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction into the revised MB-SAPs and relevant national targets, and to ensure synergies with other national planning processes, including existing, new, and updated national determined contributions and national adaptation plans as appropriate. However, we suggest to add a text to the draft decision requesting the CBD Secretariat to coordinate directly with the UNFCCC Secretariat in order to develop guidelines to ensure synergies between the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and the Paris Agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, Lebanon. Now Norway, Costa Rica, and India.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're pleased to see that the decision text clearly recognizes that biodiversity loss, climate change, desertification, and land degradation are inseparable and interdependent crises that must be addressed in an integrated manner. And also that we cannot achieve the goals and targets in our global framework without urgent and efficient action on climate change. This message corresponds with the findings of the IPBES Global Assessment referring to the 2050 vision of the CBD and how we will not be able to reach this without action in line with the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. The sixth assessment report from the IPCC offers the best available scientific evidence and information on the connection between climate and biodiversity, and Norway supports welcoming the report as part of a decision text. Nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches offer benefits for conserving biodiversity while simultaneously buffering against the effects of climate. It is also a cost-effective tool acknowledged in both Action Targets 8 and 11. Parties should be encouraged to integrate these elements in their MB-SAPs and other relevant processes. We believe UNEA Resolution 5.5 on nature-based solutions is instrumental in our common understanding of what nature-based solutions are and the safeguards to be applied. We therefore support Para 7 on guidance on the application of nature-based solutions in the context of the CBD, with some minor changes in line with suggestions provided by New Zealand and Canada. We support the suggestion from the EU and the UK requesting the Executive Secretary to update the CBD guidelines for ecosystem-based approaches to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, with an addendum on nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches for climate mitigation. Lastly, as mentioned in our intervention under agenda item 4, the IPCC report, we would like to see some of the findings and recommendations reflected in this decision as well. Text suggestions will be submitted in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now Costa Rica, followed by India and Italy.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. The 2030 Agenda, agreed by the UN in 2015, is a framework which sets out the ecological, social, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. It's imperative that we follow it for sustainable development globally. A characteristic of the agenda is striving to see the indivisibility and the intersectoral nature of the issues we face. Therefore, Costa Rica believes that a way to contribute to this indivisibility is to accept the close relationship between climate change action, in particular adaptation, mitigation, resilience, and risk reduction, and the loss of biodiversity, and promote concrete measures such as nature-based solutions. Therefore, we would like to propose a new paragraph to the draft recommendation for the COP on loss of biodiversity and climate change, which would be as follows. We urge the parties to, under the 8 and 11 targets of the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, to continue to work towards a better understanding of nature-based solutions, in particular those related to standards and criteria. This is one of the topics covered during the intergovernmental consultations on nature-based solutions. This was held in Nairobi last week. There was a general consensus there on the need for more understanding of this. The definition was clearly set out in Resolution 5 of UNEA. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. India, Italy, and then the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. India supports the global strategies that have been adopted to address biodiversity and climate change, but must take into account national circumstances and capabilities, as well as principles such as common but differentiated responsibilities. India is implementing the National Action Plan on Climate Change through 8 national missions which focus on solar energy, enhanced energy efficiency, sustainable habitat, water, Himalayan ecosystem, Green India, sustainable agriculture, and strategic knowledge for climate change. India welcomes the voluntary guidelines for the design and effective implementation of ecosystem-based approach to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction for consideration by UNFCCC. India stands in support of the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services of the IBIS. Also, we welcome the special reports of the IPCC. Target 8 of the framework calls for the minimization of the impact of climate change and ocean acidification on biodiversity and the increase of its resilience through mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction actions, including through nature-based solutions and or ecosystem-based approaches, while minimizing negative and fostering positive impacts of climate action on biodiversity. India has also started preparing National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan to achieve the targets outlined by KMGBF. India would try to bring convergence between National Climate Plan and National Biodiversity Plan with an aim to bring synergy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, India. Now Italy, followed by Russia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Italy would like to support the statements made by European Union, Spain, and many other parties about the role that ecosystem-based approaches and nature-based solutions have on addressing climate change mitigation and adaptation and biodiversity loss. Italy warmly thanks the co-chair, the Secretariat, and the parties that contributed to the consultations and shed light on the standards and criteria of the tools defined as nature-based solutions. In this regard, Italy underlines that the definition of nature-based solutions approved by UNEA 5 is clear and does not require further clarification. The definition provides for standards and criteria that allow the development of projects and plans that aim to protect, sustainably use and manage, as well as restore all types of natural or modified ecosystems. These projects and plans address at the same time social, economic, and environmental challenges. This definition is a crucial prerequisite to guide the choices of governments, businesses, and civil society towards projects and plans that pursue the objectives of minimizing the impact of climate change on biodiversity, increasing biodiversity resilience through mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction, and promoting the positive impacts of climate action on biodiversity. The UNEA definition allows excluding projects that are more nature-based problems than solutions. Italy believes that the UNEA 5 definition is the best possible tool to achieve Target 8 and the other pertinent targets of the GBF. Lastly, Italy wants also to underline that many nature-based solutions allow to further mobilize climate finance in favor of biodiversity. We would like to see all above reflected in the draft recommendation, and we will send our written proposal to the Secretariat. Thank you, Mr. Chair, also for your patience.
Grazie, Italy. Now, Russian Federation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair. I'm going to attempt to be brief. We'd like to associate ourselves with all the states which backed the continuation of the work in this field and continuation of cooperation between IPBES and the IPCC for a joint resolution of the issues of biodiversity and climate change. A great deal was said on this, just 2 paragraphs. In paragraph 4, little c, at the end of the sentence, we would add, including in the review and updating of their national strategies and plans of action. Concerning paragraphs 7 and 8, we fully share the positions which were voiced by Brazil and Eswatini, who spoke on behalf of the Africa region. We also regret that the issue of nature-based solutions is being considered by us for a very narrow prism, only that of climate change, as we believe that this is a very important instrument and one which could be successfully applied to the resolution of other problems, including social ones, including in the field of biodiversity. Now, we cherish the hope that further intergovernmental work on finding clear definitions of what nature-based solutions involve for a common, non-discriminatory use by all states will enable us to substantially make progress in terms of solving issues within the framework of the Global Framework Programme and sustainable development as a whole. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Russian Federation. With this, we finish with interventions from Paris. I will give the floor to few observers. Please be very succinct. Hopefully less than 2 minutes. I'll give the floor to IPLC's representative, 225.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For indigenous peoples and local communities, there's a definite linkage between climate change and biodiversity. It's experienced every day on the ground in communities in different parts of the globe. We therefore are in support of this type of discussion between climate change and biodiversity within the framework and the various targets that are in the framework, and that needs to be emphasized most definitely. So I'll cut to our particular requests for additional text just to consider consistency of the language. So in paragraph 4, the recommendations in subparagraph A, we'd like to add in the following text where the line reads, in particular for vulnerable ecosystems and other ecosystems that are irreplaceable, and insert indigenous peoples and local communities and other stakeholders, end of insert. That ends the sentence that directly depend on biodiversity. On paragraph 5, we'd like to insert where the paragraph begins, encourages parties, other governments, and to insert IPLCs and other relevant organizations. Also to further insert at the end of paragraph 5, where the line says, and other effective area-based conservation measures and add in the text and indigenous and traditional territories. We've submitted our statement to the Secretariat along with these recommendations, and we hope to have support from the parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to see if there are parties supporting these suggestions. Please raise your hand. I see one hand. Thank you very much. Now I'll give the floor to UNDRR.
Thank you, Chair. UNDR would like to reiterate the role of disaster risk reduction for achieving Target 8 and 11 and the inherent link with climate and biodiversity issues. These interlinkages are also referenced in the CBD COP Decision 14/5 that encourages parties to foster coherent, integrated, and co-beneficial implementation of relevant international framework, including the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. The UN General Assembly Political Declaration of the high-level meeting on the recent midterm review of the Sendai Framework calls on member states to strengthen comprehensive disaster risk governance, including by promoting nature-based solution, ecosystem-based approaches, as well as mainstreaming disaster risk reduction in the implementation of policy areas related to biodiversity and the environment. We would like to highlight 4 entry points that are aligned with the priorities of the Sendai Framework: data and information on the impact on ecosystems, enhanced risk understanding, nature-based solution as connector and strengthen comprehensive risk governance and management, enhanced risk-informed investments for greater resilience, including natural infrastructure, and the role of nature-based solutions in preparedness and the application of building back better. UNDR takes note of existing voluntary guidelines and sets ready to support the development of new, updated, and complementary guidance and tools as called by the parties to enhance coherence, complementarity, and synergy. Thank you.
Thank you. IUCN, followed by Ramsar.
Gracias, señor presidente. IUCN generally supports. There's no mic.
The mic is with Ramsar.
Oh, so go ahead first.
Chair, with your permission, and in the interest of time, biodiversity and climate change are inextricably interlinked and have to be addressed in an integrated manner. At least 9 conventional wetlands COP resolutions from our last 4 COPs directly address wetlands and climate change, including their role in mitigation, adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and water security, and encompassing a range of actions, guidance, and tools. Regarding the recommendations on biodiversity and climate change in document 2512, we would therefore like to make the following suggestions. In paragraph 41, subparagraph 4.4, under item B, in relation to ensuring synergies with other national planning processes, we recommend adding relevant national planning processes of other biodiversity-related conventions and coordination with their respective national focal points. Under item C, in relation to tools and guidance, we recommend including consideration of tools and guidance of other biodiversity-related conventions. In relation to subparagraph 4.5, it's important to consider climate change in planning and implementing ecosystem restoration, and we therefore suggest including reference to Target 2 of the KMGBF. In subparagraph 4.8, we recommend adding reference to the liaison group of the biodiversity-related conventions. We draw attention to the ongoing work by the Scientific and Technical Review Panel of the Conventional Wetlands in relation to climate change and wetlands. This includes development of tools that support integration of wetlands action in climate change planning frameworks. We recognize the need for further in-depth analysis of the multiple current and future impacts of climate change on ecosystem health, function, and distribution, and their implications for the role of ecosystems in climate regulation and in the hydrological cycle. In this regard, we encourage further collaboration between IPBES and IPCC and with the Scientific and Technical Review Panel of the Conventional Wetlands. Chair, these suggestions will be submitted in writing. Thank you.
If an observer is making suggestions to include text, you should be very careful if it's 1, 2, 3, and consider that it could be difficult for parties to identify if they agree with all suggestions. So please save your bullets to be clear if you want to get support, because sometimes can be confusing to propose many changes to different paragraphs, and maybe parties cannot track all of them. Ramsar made many suggestions. I hope parties could follow up. So I would like to see if there is support to what Ramsar mentioned. I see Switzerland. Thank you very much. So same advice for further observers. Please be very succinct. Now, microphone back to IUCN, please.
Thank you, Chair. IUCN generally supports the draft recommendation under this agenda item. As Gabon, Korea, and many others, we underline the importance of considering climate change beyond the implementation of Targets 8 and 11. For instance, in paragraph 5, existing and projected impacts of climate change on biodiversity should also be considered when implementing Targets 2 and 4. Chair, further guidance could be developed and/or collected to assist parties, especially concerning how to avoid and mitigate negative impacts of climate change responses, such as when deploying renewable energy measures, and how to integrate nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches in NBSAPs. Regarding NBS, as mentioned by Germany, Cook Islands, and several parties before us, IUCN reiterates that they must not be used either as a substitute for or as a means to postpone ambitious reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that science tells us are required today. We invite parties to use the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions. Its application is essential to guard against unanticipated negative outcomes and/or misuse, and help all actors to assess the effectiveness of interventions. Finally, Chair, IUCN recommends conducting a rapid analysis of the Biodiversity and Climate Change Program by SBSTTA-25 to identify gaps in guidance needed for the integration of climate considerations in the implementation of the GBF. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, IUCN. I'll give the floor to women. Representative 266, followed by Youth 706.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Cecilia Githaiga from Kenya, speaking on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. Women, change actors, 50% of the global population, experience disproportionate impacts of climate change. They play vital roles that must be valued, supported through legal, technical, and functional capacities backed by adequate and consistent funding. We propose the following adjustments. To para 4, after the words framework to provide that the actions proposed should be undertaken, add, in line with the human rights, including the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, women's rights to land and resources, and agreed conclusions of the 66th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. And after the words with the full and effective participation of, add, all stakeholders, particularly those whose livelihoods largely depend on biodiversity, including indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. At paragraph 4A, add at the end, particularly indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. At paragraph 4B, delete reference to greenhouse gas cuts, and after nationally determined contributions, add climate change action plans and strategies. At paragraph 4C, at the end, add gender plan of action. At paragraph 5, add the words impact. After the words impacts of climate change, add indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. At paragraph 7, add assess the impacts. At paragraph 7, add to assess the impacts after the word sustainable development, and add prioritizing permanent emissions reducing proposals. Between paragraph 5 and 6, add BIS, request parties at COP16 to reaffirm the precautionary principles on geoengineering by affirming decision X/338W. We request parties to support our proposals. Thank you, Chair.
I will ask if there is support. There were many suggestions. I hope you were able to find, you know very well the document and all paragraphs. I'd like to see hands if they support this, many proposals. I don't see, yes, I see hands there. Thank you very much. Now, last two interventions are from Youth 706, followed by CBD Alliance 244.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We are concerned that nature-based solutions are already being implemented in ways that endanger biodiversity and threaten indigenous people and local communities, and agree with proposals by Mexico, Sweden, Finland, and others for strong social and environmental safeguards and a human rights-based approach on nature-based solutions. We also continue to express deep concerns about biodiversity offsetting, which is a false solution with strong evidence that it does not deliver on biodiversity outcomes. We call for a process to compile the best available evidence on the impact of carbon and biodiversity offsets and other market-based approaches on biodiversity. We therefore propose the following new paragraph to come after the existing paragraphs that reads, also request the Executive Secretary to compile studies and evidence on the implications of carbon and biodiversity offsets and other market-based approaches to biodiversity, and to make this available to SBSTTA prior to COP17. We support the deletion of paragraph 7 as proposed by Venezuela, DRC, and others, as well as references to the precautionary principle. Finally, we highlight the need for synergetic approaches to biodiversity and climate change financing to avoid double counting and achieve Target 19E of the KMGBF. We request party support for these proposals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ask countries and parties if there is support to suggestions by previous speaker. I don't see hands. I see one hand there. Thank you. Last intervention from CBD Alliance, 244.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Alliance. Right now, ecosystems are collapsing under the impacts of climate change, and some climate policies pose even more threats to biodiversity. But the proposed SBSTTA recommendation lacks agency and might fail to address these impacts. Therefore, we kindly request party support for the inclusion of the following elements. 1, a request to the Secretariat to compile studies, practices, and perspectives on the adverse impacts of climate-focused interventions on biodiversity, including on carbon and biodiversity offsetting, biomass projects, and geoengineering. 2, to include in paragraph 5, after the words, projected impacts of climate change, the additional following words, and climate-related policies. 3, a request to the Secretariat to compile best practices on measures to reduce the impact of climate change on biodiversity. 4, add in paragraph 6, a call for investments in biodiversity action to protect and restore ecosystems damaged by climate change. 5, request financial support for implementing ecosystem-based approaches, ensuring that equitable considerations alongside NBS. 6, a paragraph reaffirming the precautionary principle and decision 10/338W in view of the increase of risky geoengineering proposals and field experiments. 7, include a paragraph to address the interaction of social, racial, intergenerational, and gender inequalities with climate-related biodiversity impacts. We seek party support for these recommendations for all these elements or separately. Finally, we support the deletion of paragraph 7 as requested or proposed by some parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there support from parties to what observer expressed? I see some hands. Thank you very much. With this, we finish deliberations on this topic. I know there are some parties still requesting the floor, but I close the list. After hearing these interventions, I propose to establish a contact group to further work on the conclusions on the recommendations to the Conference of the Parties. A shared text will be developed for use in this group. The group will be facilitated by Ms. Tia Stevens of Australia and Ms. Mariela Canepa Montalvo from Peru. The contact group will be tasked to finalize the draft recommendations, and the time will be for tomorrow morning. And I will ask you to be very concise. We heard a lot. There are 8 paragraphs. To put all pieces together, separate, leave for the COP to decide on political matters, to have clarity what is about funding, what is about collaboration with IPCC, with IPBES, and to consider mitigation, adaptation, restoration, the issue of nature-based solutions, the issue of ecosystem-based approaches, the issue of considering different ecosystems, to have clarity in different elements. Where there is no agreement, leave this to COP to decide, but at least to have as clear as possible the text. And I hope to see real scientific and technical support in how to move forward to address climate change and biodiversity loss. We heard a lot. Many things were repetitive, many things were opposite. We should be inclusive and to leave the elements as clear as possible in different segments so we can have clarity in how to move forward. And for those elements where definitely is not an agreement, to leave clearly identified. I wish you all the best, and I hope these 8 paragraphs can be clear with some additions and to get a good document. Thank you very much. We have very limited time. It's now, we have about half an hour, and I would like to move forward to next agenda item. To consider conference room papers. So let's move to conference room paper 1 on item 3D on plant conservation. Now, I propose to begin our discussion on this. The CRP1 was prepared on the basis of the 26 interventions made on Sunday afternoon and Monday morning. We had a very rich discussion, and based on all the available input, with the Secretariat, I produced a compromise text with the support of the Secretariat. As we heard from the, can you please remain in silence? We need to get the best use of the half an hour we have. So if you need to have conversations, please outside the room. As we heard from the presentation by the Global Partnership on Plant Conservation, please, colleagues, remain in silence, please. People there near Georgia, Germany, please, can you remain in silence, please? The voluntary complementary actions were developed to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. They have undergone a peer review and are supported by Information Note 4, which provide the rationales and additional information for each of the proposed actions. As we consider the CRP today, I will urge you to keep in mind that we already have available in relation to the global strategy for plant conservation, and to consider keeping the actions clear and succinct rather than repeating text that is already in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Before I open the floor, I would like to invite the Secretariat to announce some editorial clarifications on this document. So, Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. First, regarding the citation of adopted decisions, I'd like to inform you that the Secretariat is in the process of bringing CBD decisions in line with the way UN resolution, such as that of the General Assembly, ECOSOC, and Security Council, among others, are written. This is the reason that the date of adoption of decisions are being added after decisions are cited. When citing an adopted decision, the date of adoption will be provided at first mention, whether in the preamble or the operative part. When the date is not readily available or clearly indicated in the session report, the last day of the session will be used, as it is usually the day on which resolutions are adopted. Secondly, there are two editorial corrections to be made for this document. Please note a correction that should be made in document CLP1 in the annex, action 4D. At the end of the paragraph, the reference to the Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture should read as follows. After the word potential, it read, taking into account the relevant frameworks and plans of action developed under the Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Full stop. Additionally, please note that all references to nature-based solution and/or ecosystem-based approaches will be adjusted throughout the document for consistency. As agreed in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, it will be and/or. This applies to Action 8B and 11 of the annex. The Secretary will make the necessary corrections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with this, I would like to open the floor, and thanks to Secretariat that helped to take into account most of the comments, trying to have a balance and in consideration, and this is in general for all documents being prepared as a CRP, is not exactly including everything, but it's a try to have a balance and a consideration and interpretation of different views, what we have. And remember that these are complementary actions. Some of the actions were not touched because there were no comments on that. This applies to, for example, 3B or 7 or on 16 or 18 or target 19, 20, 21A. So those were not requests to be changed. So I invite you for not to introduce any changes. So I invite you first to work on the annex, because this is to see if suggestions to complementary actions are adequately reflecting the additions we have in CRP 1. So I would like to start with target 1, with complementary actions in target 1, if the text we have is acceptable. If there is any comment, please request to the floor. I see Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the end of item 1, we would like to add, while respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples in line with the target language. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can you repeat this at dictation speed?
Thank you, Chair. At the end of number 1, we would like to add, while respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples in line with the target language. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any objection to language suggested by Canada? Please raise your hand. Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, it was not an objection to the language raised by Canada, but I would just like to say that we think the Secretariat did a very good job in this document, and we all know how hard it is to balance all suggestions. And we do have, there are a few of our proposals that were incorporated at this document, but still we could live with that as it is. So my suggestion would be maybe if we could make a round with the other delegations and see if people can live with the document as it is, knowing that it's not perfect. We would, if we are to open it, and of course we're going to have suggestions on several items, but we can live with the document as it is. So if other delegations can live with that, maybe it could be a way forward. Thank you. Otherwise, I reserve my right to make comments on that, on number one, because I do have proposal on number one that were incorporated in the document. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil, and thank you for this very good suggestion. So I would like then, following this recommendation, to see if we can live with the document as a whole. You are referring the recommendation and the annexes in the understanding that was a very good effort from the Secretariat to compile these recommendations, and also to remind that these complementary actions were already through a process of peer review and a lot of work. Is any objection to consider CRP1 as a whole? That can be a very good precedent to move forward. I see no objections, then we can adopt this document as it is. Thank you very much. Wow, that's very relieving. Now, with this, I propose now we take up document CRP2 on findings from the assessment by IPBES and their implications on the work for the convention, but in particular, well, the first reading of the pre-session document on 16 October, we had the opportunity to listen to intervention of 34 parties and 3 observers. And the recommendations relate to the assessment on the invasive species, sustainable wildlife, you know, and biodiversity, climate change, and in particular, the assessment on values for the successful implementation of the convention. So document CRP2 is specific to this one. And as I said before, we will address invasive species together in the specific document, also sustainable use and climate change. So this document is in particular for the assessment on values, on the methodological assessment report on the diverse values and valuation of nature of the IPBES and their implication of the work under our convention. So I would like to open for consideration this document. I think the discussion was very straightforward with the support of my colleague Marina. So I'd like to open the floor for comments on CRP2. I have Brazil.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And sorry for taking the floor and somewhat breaking the nice spirit that we had in the anterior item. But Unfortunately, we have problems with CRP2 and CRP3. Contrary to CRP1, which I believe, as I said, the Secretariat did an excellent job of balancing everyone's suggestions, we didn't see any of our suggestions reflected either on CRP2 or either on CRP3, which raises some concerns with us, because this is the second time that this happened in this very week. It has already happened in the document concerning item 3.A, and we requested the document to be revised, and that's why we started discussions on the contact group on a second version, because the second version, a second version needed to be made to incorporate our comments that were incorporated in the first version, and we had exactly the same problem now. I called attention on this matter earlier on today to the Secretariat and also to you, sir, but so far we haven't seen any second version of these two documents, and we have provided many detailed comments on these two. So I think we're not in a position unfortunately, to advance on the negotiations of these two documents if we don't see our comments reflected on that. So I would kindly request the Secretariat to prepare a new version of CRP2 and 3. As I have done before earlier today, I have requested precisely that so that we could avoid the situation that we are coming here right now. So without a revised version, I feel it wouldn't be adequate to reflect, because maybe other countries also didn't have their comments reflected, I don't know, but certainly Brazilian comments weren't reflected in both documents. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Brazil. Argentina?
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you so much, Chair. We back what was just said by Brazil. We too are concerned that a great many comments which were heard were not, in fact, reflected in CRP2 by the Secretariat. A great many comments were taken into account during the plenary. We heard a great many things. A lot is contained in this document, but it would have been good if we had been able to strike a right balance in the CRP2, so we entirely agree with Brazil. We too would like to see our comments duly reflected in CRP2, and we believe that the comments of all delegations should be taken into account. Thank you. Thank you to Argentina.
El acercamiento por parte de Brasil.
I've heard what Brazil said to us within the framework of the contact group this morning. I discussed this with the Secretariat. And we have to understand that it's not always very easy to include everything in one single document. The idea here is to reach a right balance, a just balance. We are currently working on the issue of invasive alien species, and we hope that we will have cleaned up the annexes in time. We also hope that we have comprehensive versions available to us in the near future, and we'll have a revised version of CRP3 very soon. I don't know what the situation is around CRP2. I'm going to discuss this with the Secretariat. Having said all this, if you want to take advantage of the last few minutes that we have available to us to reflect on this document, which is a fairly concise one, if you want to look at where additions can be made, this would enable us to make progress on this document. And in the meantime, I'm going to consult with the Secretariat. So if you can think of elements which need to be taken into account here, please do not hesitate to say so. And in that way, we'll have a more balanced document. We have a few more minutes, and I call upon Brazil and Argentina to consider this. and to take advantage of the time we have available to us to make any necessary additions to this document to ensure that it is acceptable to all. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience. I touched base with the Secretariat on the suggestions that were not clearly reflect. So I invite, if there is a will, we can try to put back these elements. When I think there are two very concrete, one from Argentina and Brazil. This is a short document. Maybe we can together solve it in the next few minutes. And while being process CRP 3. If there is a will, we can go paragraph by paragraph. Secretariat identify these proposals, and I think we can move forward if there is a will. Do you agree? If this is the case, I would like I believe the suggestions are in paragraph 3 and in paragraph 7C. So maybe we can pass through the document. When we reach to this, we can consider these elements to capture properly and to see if we have an agreement. And otherwise, we mark the different elements and send for the L version to be hopefully solved. I hope won't be any problem on this. Since we know those are on those paragraphs, I would like to ask if there are any comments on page 1 that is considering is the preambular section on the Conference of the Parties. Please raise your hand. If there is any comment on page 1, then we will go to paragraph by paragraph. I see Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one on that preamble. On the fourth sentence, we believe it might be just a typo and a copy-paste mistake. We believe that after emphasizing also, we should delete the call in target 14 and replace that by emphasis also that target 14 of the framework calls for the full integration of biodiversity. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, looks is editorial. Thank you, Canada. I hope it's clear. If there are no more comments on page 1, let's move to page 2, paragraph 1. Japan.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to make a comment to add the paragraph after para 2. Is it the right time to this comment?
I was going paragraph by paragraph. I ask you to wait a little bit,
Okay.
and then I have Brazil on paragraph 1.
Thank you, Chair. And in line with our written comments, in paragraph 1, we would suggest adding after the reference to the summary for policymakers at the third line, and its key messages, comma. And then we would suggest deleting the new paragraph 3, which reads endorses the key messages. As we have highlighted from our perspective, the key messages are part of the summary for policymakers. And by disaggregating them into a separate paragraph, it seems that we are placing them in a higher hierarchy than the summary for policymakers as a whole. So from our perspective, we would prefer to have them all together in paragraph 1, and we would then delete paragraph 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I see your point. So I'm wondering if the suggestions to welcomes with appreciation the assessment and the key messages, and to delete endorse the key messages. Is there any opposition to what Brazil suggests? I see Argentina, Russian Federation, and UK. I'm asking about the amendments proposed by Brazil. Argentina?
Thank you. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. We agree with the changes proposed by Brazil. At the same time, we would ask for the deletion of the sentence with appreciation, so that it would read, welcomes the issuance of the methodological, etc. And then we agree with that proposed by Brazil. Thank you.
Federación Rusa seguida de
Russian Federation, followed by United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yesterday, similar to Brazil, we actually made the same comment, requested to move language around key messages to paragraph 1. So we will leave with the option just proposed by Brazil. And we also agree with Argentina. In this case, we don't need paragraph 3, so we like to delete paragraph 3. And we also okay with the suggestion from Argentina for the beginning of this paragraph. Thank you.
Reino Unido.
United Kingdom.
Thank you very much, Chair. These key messages are the result of years of hard work from world-leading experts and the most rigorous scientific peer review process in the world. They're scientific facts. They've already been approved and accepted by around 140 countries, and we don't see that there is a reason for the COP not to endorse them. There is precedent for CBD endorsing IPBES key messages. For example, Decision 13/15 endorsed the key messages of the pollinators assessment. Decision 14/6 endorsed the key messages of the land degradation assessment and of the regional assessments. If the SBSTTA did not put an endorsement into this recommended decision, that would beg the question why those assessments were worth endorsing and this one isn't. Therefore, we'd like to keep the text as it currently remains. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to propose as a compromise if we use in paragraph 3, welcomes in brackets and endorse in brackets, not to move key messages to paragraph 1. So we welcome the issuance of the assessment and to leave for COP to decide this political issue so far. Can this be a way forward? Because I will listen to many interventions in both ends. Is anybody against that? Raise your hand. You are against. You do not agree, Peru? Peru, you have the floor.
Proposal, Mr. Chair.
So you support my proposal. So now, we retain paragraph 3 with starting with welcomes in brackets, then endorses with brackets, the key messages. And on paragraph 1, welcomes, and there's a suggestion to put in brackets with appreciation the issuance and so on, right? This is where we are in this CRP. Any other suggestion? I believe those are the main comments so far. Okay, with this, I would like to hear comments on this, if there are more comments on paragraph 1, 2, or 3. If not, move to paragraph 4. I see Russian Federation, UK, and Brazil. I hope you want still talking about what I referred in previous paragraph. Russian Federation.
Thank you, Chair. So if you suggest the way you did, where in paragraph 3 you suggest to have 2 square brackets, keeping endorsed and keeping welcome, similar logic in this case in paragraph 1, we keep and its key messages in square brackets as well in this case. And of course we fully appreciate that our colleagues in UK, they're living in a precedent law system for centuries. So, and it's very dear for them precedents, but we have also other options and we can at every COP decide what we want and the way we want. So that's not really being bound by anything in the previous times. So if we keep it and we also add square brackets around the entire paragraph 3, so then we can proceed as you suggested. Thank you.
I understand there was a suggestion to include key messages in paragraph 1 that can be in brackets. The idea is not to fool the document with brackets. So I kindly request my colleague from the Russian Federation if we can just leave paragraph 3 with these 2 brackets in welcomes and endorse, but not the whole paragraph. Just to leave this clarity to the COP I don't see why we need to bracket the whole thing. But I'm in your hands. Can you leave just to leave welcome and endorses, Russian Federation? Microphone to Russia.
Chair, my apologies, but I mean, with the negotiation logic, unfortunately, we should ask for square brackets around this paragraph because it's all connected, yeah? So, and it depends on other elements, because if it stays endorses, we don't want this paragraph at all. So, and the same whether the key messages will survive in paragraph 1 or not, that also will affect the decision on paragraph 3, so that's why I ask the whole paragraph in square brackets. Thank you.
Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. We would support the comment made by Russia, and in paragraph 2, we would have another suggestion of change in the 5th line after the Convention on Biological Diversity, comma, the Cumming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We would suggest replace this with the Convention on Biological Diversity and its Cumming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as the GBF has been adopted under the Convention, which provides the foundation for its strategic plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. This is an editorial the amendment that I don't believe is any problem, and it's Cumming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you. So we have the amendments in paragraph 1 and in paragraph 3 with brackets. I will ask Secretary later to read how, with these changes, how it looks like, but in the spirit to move on and that we have a few minutes, I will ask for comments on paragraph 4. I see no request from parties. Paragraph 5. I see no request. Paragraph, yes, Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. In paragraph 5, we would suggest replacing in particular at the 4th line with including. As we understand, there are multiple pathways to make use of the information contained in the assessment, and not necessarily only through the NAB SAPs, so we would prefer a less prescriptive language. Thank you.
Any objection to suggestion by Brazil, UK?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, this is a comment relating to the previous suggestion from Brazil. We have no problems linking the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Global Biodiversity Framework, but instead of saying "its," we would prefer to say agreed under the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, agreed under the Convention on Biological Diversity. Thank you.
Brazil, can you agree with suggestion from UK? I see noting. Thank you very much. So I would say the Kunming Global Biodiversity Framework agreed under CBD, right? Thank you. So it's clarity on drafting, on redaction on paragraph 2. Now there's an amendment on paragraph 5. I didn't see any objection. Now comments on paragraph 6. Argentina.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. In paragraph 6, in the 4th line, we would suggest changing invites to urges, and urges developed country parties, other parties, and other governments in a position to do so, as well as relevant organizations to provide support to developing countries in this regard. And then we would ask the inclusion of including through finance, capacity building, and technology transfer. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. So invites by urges, and at the end, including capacity building, finance, capacity building, and technology transfer. Can we agree with these suggestions? I see no objections. Thank you very much. Now, paragraph 7. I see Argentina.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair. For paragraph 7, we suggest that the first part of the paragraph read as follows. Also encourages
To
parties
take into account the findings of the assessments when implementing the convention according to their national needs, capacities, and circumstances, to take as appropriate and in accordance to relevant international obligations. Y a continuación, el listado.
and then eliminates the list, which seems to be redundant. Thank you.
Argentina, ¿puede volver a...
Argentina, could you go back to reading the drafting, and what you're saying is to delete A, B, C, and D? Could you read it out again, please? Thank you.
Encourages parties to take into account the findings of the assessments when implementing the convention according to their national needs, capacities, and circumstances as appropriate and in accordance to relevant international obligations.
Do we agree with the amendments proposed by Argentina on paragraph 7, including deletion of subparagraphs from A to D? I see no objections. I see UK followed by Sweden, UK, and EU.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would like to retain A, B, C, D. We may be flexible to reformulate 7, but we really would like to keep these elements. That would be a quite radical reduction. It wasn't proposed in the non-paper CRP before, so that's why we would like to keep it. Thank you.
Thank you. UK?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo the comments just made by Sweden. I think the role of this agenda item is to consider the findings and its implications for the convention. So while obviously we'd be very supportive of taking into account the findings, we think A, B, C, and D are quite important to pick out specific ways in which parties can do that in a way that furthers the work of this convention. So we would like to keep these in. Although, as Sweden says, we can be flexible on working on the language. Thank you.
Thank you very much. EU?
Thank you, Chair. EU supports the intervention of UK and Sweden. Thank you.
Brazil?
Thank you, Chair. We share some of the concerns that were raised by Argentina. We do think that some of the options outlined in A to C seem overly prescriptive or are out of the scope of the convention. For instance, especially 7C on reforming policies, institutions, and norms and societal goals. From our perspective, this is under the mandate of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development rather than CBD. We would suggest perhaps as a way forward is to retain the chapeau as proposed by Argentina. And if you are to retain A to C, we would suggest the following amendments. In 7A, we would suggest adding after diverse values of nature, comma, while recognizing that given the diversity of social, economic, and ecological contexts, there is no one-size-fits-all valuation method, and available valuation methods may be adapted to address local realities. And this is exactly agreed language from the summary for policymakers, so I believe it shouldn't raise any concern, but it just highlights that there are different evaluation methods available. And in paragraph C, we would suggest deleting the original paragraph C and replacing it with the following amendment, the following alternate text. Support participatory processes to promote different sustainability pathways. We understand this will be more consistent with Goal D of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So perhaps this could be a good way forward to try to accommodate all the concerns that were raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. And certainly to have the subparagraphs from A to D are providing details of the work of this assessment. I see that in particular for many developing countries, the consideration of different values more than economic is very important. So there's a lot of work here and merit from my point of view. So I invite you to be flexible and to recognize the different elements. We might remember that IBE's slogan in some way is to produce policy relevant but not policy prescriptive advice. And for CBD, this also applies. And so there is a merit to maintain some of these elements. So I think it's to Brazil to propose some suggestions on A. Now it's an important change on C. I'm wondering about the time. We only have 5 minutes more on translation. And so I hope that with some of these amendments, we can retain subparagraphs. I will request to Brazil to provide the language to include this by the Secretariat. I hope you are tracking all the changes. And I see Switzerland, Germany, and Mexico. Please go very quickly to decide how to move on.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Similar to Sweden and UK, we would like to retain the subparagraphs. And Mr. Chair, you know, already paragraph 7 says we encourage parties, according to their national needs, capacities, and circumstances, to take as appropriate. So I think there are already so many, you know, words that should not worry us in taking this advice. So in that sense, I don't understand the concerns, and we would like to keep as it was proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, and I invite you to be flexible on this. This is good advice to consider the multi-dimensions of biodiversity values. We've been fighting not to consider only the economic dimension, and this is open the opportunity to different values on biodiversity, which is important as coming from as a developing country. Now I'll give the floor to Germany, followed Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We concur with Switzerland that the chapeau of 7, with the word encourages, says everything. It's nothing about being policy prescriptive. And I myself have witnessed the discussions we had in Bonn and IPES when we adopted that assessment, and we discussed about especially about the C, that how important what policies means, what institutions means. And I think the way it is captured here, it has always been part of a very important message from the assessment. So I would ask colleagues in the room that we can keep that and not reformulate it at that stage. Thank you very much.
Mexico, followed by Argentina.
Thank you, Chair. Mexico would agree with Germany and Sweden on retaining this paragraph. We also think that the chapeau of this is already very decaffeinated, so we don't need, something else. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to Colombia, because we know the position of Argentina and Ghana, and we have just 3 minutes more of translation.
No, de Colombia solo apoyar.
Colombia supports keeping the paragraph as it is. Thank you.
Gracias, Colombia.
Thank you, Colombia.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to support Germany and the others that we retain the paragraph as it stands, because the various items gives a guide to the countries what to do. So we support it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Peru, and then go to Argentina.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Peru has the same recommendation to keep the paragraph as it is. Thank you. Thank you, Peru. Argentina. Help us, please. Well, thank you, Chair. On the sub-items, we could accept them with the formulation suggested by Brazil, and if we add in paragraph 7 in the chapeau, in accordance to relevant international obligations. Thank you for the flexibility. I hope that Italy could support that. Give me a second so I can quickly consult with the Secretariat.
I would like to put for your consideration that since we will not have any more translation, I mean, interpreters need to rest, since we are close, as I see, to have a conclusion on this document, we can continue a few minutes just in English. Is there any objection? I see nodding. I thanks for your flexibility. So I would like to go through the remaining paragraphs, and then I will ask Secretary to read all changes to see if we can adopt the document. Thank you for your flexibility. So Argentina, regarding paragraph 7, we have a formulation in the chapeau, including the last intervention on this treaties, and with some amendments retaining the subparagraphs in paragraph 7. I do thank you to interpreters for your help. And now I open the floor for comments on paragraph 8. I see no requests on paragraph 8. Belgium.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I hope you forgive me that I would like to go back a little bit on 7D, because there I read something which makes my linguistic feeling go wild. Consider the suggestions made in the assessment to undertake the assessment of diverse values. I mean, we're never going to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, but this goes a bit far. So I would suggest some simplification here and just replace the first part, consider, to undertake to just say something along the lines of include or perform an assessment of diverse values when developing measures to support. Much shorter and, in my very humble opinion, sounds a lot better. Thank you.
Can you repeat?
Absolutely. So it would read, include/perform, whatever the room likes most, an assessment of diverse values when developing measures to support the implementation of Target 14 of the framework.
Thank you, Belgium. UK?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, could you please clarify what the status of 7A and C is going forwards?
I was waiting to go through 8, and then I will ask Secretary to read all changes one by one. I hope that's acceptable for in order to make progress. Can you wait for that, UK? Who's UK? What is UK? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for noting. Brazil, followed by India.
Thank you, Chair. And regarding 7D, we would prefer to retain the original phrasing. We do see that with the amendment proposed by Belgium, this would become overly prescriptive as countries would need to undertake an assessment of all the typologies of values as presented in the assessment. From our perspective, this would be assessed on a case-by-case basis when countries implement Target 14. We do notice that during the discussions of the IPA's assessment on the values assessment, there are many concerns about the typologies that were presented because they sometimes may not resonate with developing countries, especially IPLCs, because sometimes the distinctions between intrinsic relation and instrumental values might not actually work for IPLCs and for many local communities in developing countries. So that is why we would prefer more flexible language under paragraph D as proposed originally in the CRP. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I can make one try. If not, with the indulgence of Belgium, we can go to original language. We could say, consider to undertake the assessment of diverse values. So it leaves the door open for this. Would that be acceptable, Brazil? I think it goes more to leave, yeah, I see noting. Thank you so much. So this could be consider to undertake the assessment for diverse, because it sounds quite strange as the original. Thank you for your cooperation. Now I'd like to see if there are, India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for going back to 7C. I would like to suggest in the first start of the C para, chapeau, restructure institutions and reform policies. That is what I would like to suggest. Restructure institutions and reform policies, comma, and their underlying norms.
Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While I understand the proposal by India, remembering what we discussed at length at IPAS when we adopted the key messages to this assessment is that institutions doesn't mean a body. Institutions is more than an organization. For an organization, the firm restructure would fit, but institutions could also be a legal thing, a system of legal or norms, and this is why the word reform is the one we should keep here and retain here. Sorry that I can't concur with that.
I see. Can India consider these comments and maybe to retain the original language? Thank you, India, for your flexibility. So we keep as it is, but also there's a suggestion to have an alt to see proposed by Brazil. So with this, I see no more comments. I will ask the Secretariat to go through the document explaining the different changes where on relevant paragraphs, so maybe we can reach an agreement. So please, my friend. From the very beginning of the document, all changes proposed, starting with the last paragraph in page 1, emphasizing also that. That's the first. So, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. In paragraph 1, recalling the preamble, there is no change. Recalling all the decisions, there is no change. Emphasizing the fact that the race value, there is no change. Emphasizing that, emphasizing also that the call for in target 14 of the framework calls for the full integration of biodiversity and its multiple values.
Just the change.
All right. So there is no other change in that paragraph, just that. Page 2, operative paragraph 1, it's bracketed, open brackets, welcome, bracket with appreciation, close bracket. In insinuance of the methodological
No,
assessment.
I'm sorry. I think there's only brackets on with appreciation.
Okay.
And it's an insertion after services, and it's key messages, right? In brackets.
Yes, and key
That was suggested by Brazil. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, I see note in Brazil. Those are the changes on paragraph 1.
Paragraph 2, fifth line, it reads, implementation of the CUMI-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework agree under the Convention on Biological Diversity, including its goals and targets, and continue without change.
Good. Now, paragraph 3.
Paragraph 3, bracket welcomes, bracket endorses, bracket, the key messages contained in summary for policymaker of assessment.
And the whole paragraph in
And
brackets.
the whole paragraph in brackets.
Paragraph 4, no changes.
Paragraph 4, no changes. Paragraph 5, changes in 4 line. Deletion of particular replaced by including through the update and revision.
Paragraph 6.
Paragraph 6, in the 3rd line, instead of invites, urges develop country parties. And at the end of the sentence, in this regard, comma, including through capacity building, finance, and technology transfer.
That's correct.
Paragraph 7, and give me 1 second here, I will get the copy from Brazil. Lisa, do you have it? You can read it.
I think Lisa can do it. I think she can.
That's a paragraph with more changes. My RAM memory is disappearing.
Thank you, Chair. So the changes to the chapeau of 7, which were made by Brazil, supported by other parties, were after capacities and circumstances to add, and in accordance with relevant international obligations. And that was the change to the chapeau.
Can you read how it reads with that the whole chapeau, please?
Yes, Chair. So the paragraph 7, the chapeau reads, also encourages parties, according to their national needs, capacities, and circumstances, and in accordance with relevant international obligations, to take as appropriate steps to.
Thank you. Does that properly reflect Argentina? Argentina está de acuerdo? Okay, I see noting. Yes, now then we continue with subparagraphs A. There's one change there. Can you say?
Thank you, Chair. I'll read all of A, subpara A. Address the diverse values of nature in ongoing and new valuation processes, including as part of ecosystem assessments. And then there's a new assertion. While recognizing that given the diversity of social, economic, and ecological contexts, there is no one-size-fits-all valuation method, and available valuation methods may be adapted to address local realities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Subparagraph B. I think there's no change.
Subparagraph, there's no change.
Subparagraph C.
Subparagraph C. Brazil presented an alt to subparagraph C, which reads, support participatory processes to promote different sustainability pathways. Thank you, Chair.
Then D, we have a simpler version also. It would read, consider to undertake the assessment of diverse. So just strike out the suggestion made in the assessment, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
those are the main changes to the document. So can we adopt the document as amended in order to produce an L document? I see Germany and UK.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My recollection of our discussion was that there was very little to no support to the changes to C. I heard a lot of support or nothing against the changes in A, but no support to changing C. And we agreed we are taking a change in the chapeau. I think that's what is at least is my recollection, and this is what I would support as for Germany. Thank you.
So can we retain C and C alt? Germany?
If you ask me if we keep both versions of C, then let's do that.
Okay, so we can have the two options and maybe see with fresh eyes on LDoc. UK?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're happy with that way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with this, I submit this document for adoption and in order to prepare an L document. I see no objection. Just in time. So I invite you to continue with the contact group on monitoring framework for those who still have energy and will to move forward with this spirit. Thank you very much. The plenary is adjourned.